This is a compilation of over 3 hours of Resident Evil viruses explained, so sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Let's kick things off with the evolution of Resident Evil's viruses. Every zombie, every mutant, every apocalypse in the Resident Evil franchise traces back to a single flower in a single cave in West Africa. One discovery in 1966 set off a chain reaction of bioweapons that would spiral out of control for decades. So today, I'm breaking down the complete evolution of every virus in Resident Evil, and everything we know about them, starting with the one that started it all, progenitor virus. The progenitor virus is potentially billions of years old. This thing was floating around as inactive junk DNA in the genomes of countless species before humans even existed, just sitting there, waiting for the right environmental trigger to wake up, and on December 4th, 1966, 3 researchers named James Marcus, Oswell Spencer, and Edward Ashford walked into an underground garden in West Africa, found a flower called the Stairway to the Sun, and pulled an ancient RNA retrovirus out of it that would eventually destroy the world several times over. Here's the thing about progenitor. It doesn't care what you are. Animal, plant, fungal, bacterial. It can infect virtually any living organism on Earth, and in humans specifically, it's almost universally lethal. If your genetics aren't compatible, you're dead. No negotiation. But the Endopia Kingdom figured this out thousands of years before Umbrella ever existed. This ancient civilization built their entire culture around the Stairway to the Sun flowers, consuming them in rituals where the vast majority of participants died. The rare survivors, they became progenitor humans, gaining extraordinary longevity and enhanced intellect. Some Endopia monarchs reportedly reigned for hundreds of years, an entire kingdom running on bioengineered super rulers, millennia before anyone in a lab coat had the same idea. And then those same biological tools destroyed them. The same hubris that would later consume Umbrella consumed the Endopia first. They engineered their own extinction. That's the paradox at the heart of this entire franchise. Progenitor creates life. It repairs dead cells, revives deceased organisms, drives evolution forward. But it also threatens total extinction the moment someone tries to control it. Every single bioweapon that follows inherits this exact duality. But the first group to truly exploit progenitor's power didn't just inherit the contradiction. They weaponized it into something far worse: T-virus. Here's the thing about the T-virus that most people get backwards. Umbrella wasn't trying to kill everyone, they were trying to build an army. And that distinction changes everything about how you understand this franchise. The problem with progenitor was simple. It was too good at killing people. A pathogen that wipes out its host in hours is a terrible weapon because it burns through a population and then has nowhere left to go. What Umbrella needed was something contagious enough to spread through enemy lines, but survivable enough that the infected would keep walking, keep fighting, keep being useful. On January 13th, 1978, Dr. James Marcus cracked it. By splicing leech DNA into the progenitor genome, he created a deliberately weakened strain that could actually let human hosts survive infection. The T-virus was born, not as a doomsday weapon, but as a compromise, which is, not ideal when you're talking about a compromise between kills everyone instantly and kills everyone slowly. But the real breakthrough came from William Birkin. He spliced Ebola RNA into the T-virus genome, creating the beta strain, and this is the one that actually produced zombies. The virus destroys your mitochondria and replaces them with viral copies that produce just barely enough energy to keep your motor neurons and lower brain functions running. Everything else dies. Your higher brain function, gone. Your personality, gone. Meanwhile, the virus is shredding your hypothalamus, flooding your system with norepinephrine and dopamine, which is why zombies are so relentlessly aggressive. They're not mindless. They're chemically locked into a permanent state of rage and hunger. But here's the kicker. Approximately 10% of humans are naturally immune. 1 in 10 people just shrug it off. That limitation, combined with the fact that your soldiers are brain-dead cannibals who can't follow orders, meant the T-virus was fundamentally flawed as a military product. And that's not a footnote. That's the entire reason every other virus in this franchise exists. T. veronica, G-virus, Ouroboros. All of them exist because the T-virus wasn't good enough. It was the prototype that worked just well enough to prove the concept, and just poorly enough to guarantee decades of increasingly insane attempts to fix it. But if you think a virus that turns people into brain dead, rotting husks is bad, wait until you hear about the one designed by a 12-year-old 14-year-old girl who put herself in a freezer for 15 years. Veronica Virus. Most viruses in this franchise were designed to make weapons. T. Veronica was designed to make a god, specifically a 12-year-old god with a queen ant complex and zero regard for her own father's well-being. Let me explain. Alexia Ashford was a child prodigy who graduated university at age 10 and immediately decided that the T-virus was thinking too small. Her vision wasn't military, it was transhumanist. She discovered a retrovirus hiding in the genome of queen ants and became obsessed with replicating ant colony hierarchy in humans, with herself sitting comfortably at the top as the supreme queen controlling every infected organism on Earth. She combined this ant retrovirus with progenitor and plant genes, creating something entirely new. Here's the thing. She fundamentally misunderstood how ant colonies actually work and built her entire doomsday plan around that misunderstanding, which is, not ideal. The first human trial happened in 1982, and the lucky volunteer was Alexander Ashford, her genetic donor and essentially her father. He didn't volunteer. Alexia and her brother Alfred injected him by force, and the results were catastrophic. Alexander's brain degenerated, his body twisted into a horrific chimera, and the facility staff started calling him Nosferatu. They locked him away in the Antarctic base and tried to forget he existed. But here's where it gets genuinely insane. After watching her father turn into a monster, 12-year-old Alexia injected herself with the same virus and climbed into a cryogenic pod. Her theory was that by slowing the virus's spread over 15 years, she could achieve gradual genetic rewriting without the brain cell destruction that killed every other host's mind. She looked at a failed experiment that turned a man into a screaming abomination and said, "I'll just do it slower." And she was right. When Alexia woke up 15 years later, she had insectoid appendages, superhuman strength, blood that burned at extreme temperatures, and psychic control over anything infected with T. Veronica. Genuinely, one of the most powerful beings in the entire franchise, and it was completely useless as a weapon. Zero airborne transmission, no way to spread it without direct injection, and the only method for preserving intelligence required 15 years of cryogenic incubation. You can't exactly pitch that to a military buyer. Great news, General. Your super soldier will be ready in 2039. Years later, Dr. Carla Radames reverse-engineered T. Veronica into a strain called T02, stripping out uncontrolled mutations and combining what was left with progenitor. The result preserved host intelligence without the incubation period, and it became a critical ingredient in something far worse. But if T. Veronica was a virus obsessed with evolution, the next one took that concept and removed every safety rail imaginable. G-Virus. Everything we've talked about so far, the progenitor, the T-Virus, T. Veronica, all of it was scary, but it was scary in a way you could wrap your head around. Zombies, monsters, parasites, you get it. The G-Virus is where Resident Evil crosses the line from dangerous bioweapon to existential threat to all human life, and the worst part is how it was discovered. Lisa Trevor had been a test subject since the late 1960s. 3 decades of continuous experimental injections. Every strain Umbrella could cook up got pumped into this woman's body. Then in 1988, researchers implanted an NEA-type parasite in her, and her immune system just destroyed it, which should have been impossible. When William Birkin investigated why, he found a dormant virus hiding inside her that nobody had ever seen before, something that may have existed in her body for the entire 30 years of torture, quietly evolving through every single injection they gave her. 3 decades of human experimentation accidentally produced the most dangerous organism ever created, which is, not ideal. Here's the thing about G-Virus. It shares a common ancestor with T-Virus through progenitor, but the two are totally dissimilar. Where T-Virus causes necrosis and relatively minor mutations, G-Virus rewrites a person so completely they become unrecognizable as human. And critically, T-mutants are almost universally infertile. G-mutants can reproduce asexually. They literally regurgitate embryos. Cool. Add that to the list. The infection spreads outward from the injection site, converting cells into G cells that produce additional virus as they go. This means the body mutates asymmetrically. Birkin injected himself in the right arm, so his right arm became massively more muscular than his left. A full vial triggers mutation within seconds, and as the mutations progress, functioning eyeballs spontaneously develop in random locations across the body, comparable to teratomas, just eyes, everywhere, for no reason. I don't know what to tell you, but here's where it gets truly terrifying. terrifying. The more you hurt a G mutant, the stronger it becomes. Mutations accelerate dramatically in response to physical trauma, meaning every bullet, every explosion, every attempt to kill it just makes it evolve faster. You're not fighting a monster, you're feeding one. The virus can repair dead cells, revive deceased organisms, and theoretically grant biological immortality through constant cellular regeneration. BSAA policy mandates immediate alert of all forces the moment G-virus is detected. Not investigate, not monitor. All forces, immediate. The G-virus was the moment the bioweapon arms race went from, we can control this, to, we absolutely cannot. But if you think an uncontrollable virus is bad, wait until you hear about an ancient parasite that controls you, Las Plagas. Every bioweapon we've talked about so far was built in a lab. Some scientist in a basement somewhere splicing genes, injecting test subjects, and praying the result didn't immediately eat them. Las Plagas flips that entire concept on its head, because these things weren't engineered. They weren't designed. They evolved naturally, potentially thousands of years before Umbrella even existed. Las Plagas are parasitic arthropods belonging to an unknown taxonomical order, which is science speak for, we literally don't know what category of animal this is. They display characteristics of insects, plants, and fungi simultaneously. They reproduce asexually, progress through 3 developmental stages after hatching, and they can control a host's nervous system through direct neural integration. Nature just casually invented the perfect bioweapon, and nobody had to spend a single research dollar. Here's where it gets interesting. The Salazar family in rural Spain knew about Las Plagas for generations. The parasites were sealed deep beneath Salazar Castle by a previous Castellan who understood exactly how dangerous they were. The family kept them locked away, buried under stone in silence, treating them less like a scientific curiosity and more like a curse that should never see daylight again. That worked for a very long time, and then Osmond Sadler showed up and convinced the young, impressionable Ramon Salazar to unseal the cave. Miners sent into the excavation site inhaled ancient spores, and the parasites regenerated inside their bodies. A species that had been functionally dormant for centuries just woke back up. Cool, that's also a thing that happened. But the real genius of Las Plagas is what they solved. Every previous bioweapon had the same fatal flaw. The hosts were either mindless, uncontrollable, or both. T-virus zombies shamble around biting things with zero tactical awareness. G-mutants are walking catastrophes with no off switch. Plagas infected ganados? They retain speech. They use tools. They operate vehicles. They execute flanking maneuvers. They maintain daily routines. These aren't corpses stumbling through a hallway. These are functional soldiers. And the command structure is brilliant. Sadler cultivated dominant species Plagas, creating a strain that allowed hosts to retain full cognitive function and free will while broadcasting orders to entire ganado armies through parasitic control signals. It's a built-in military hierarchy. Generals who think for themselves, commanding troops who obey without question. Las Plagas proved that nature had already perfected what Umbrella spent decades failing to build. But if you think a naturally evolved parasite is terrifying, wait until you see what happens when someone combines progenitor with a god complex and a plan to rewrite human DNA, Ouroboros. Every virus we've covered so far was built to create weapons. Soldiers, monsters, controllable armies. Ouroboros wasn't built to create anything. It was built to delete people. Albert Wesker didn't want a bioweapon. He wanted a filter. A biological sorting mechanism that would wash over the entire human species and separate the worthy from the worthless. If your DNA passed the test, congratulations. You get to be a god. If it didn't, you get torn apart from the inside while your own biomass keeps moving without you, which is, not ideal. Here's the thing. Ouroboros wasn't derived from the T-virus or G-virus or any of the second generation stuff we've been talking about. Wesker went straight back to the source. Pure progenitor. The original ancient retrovirus that started this entire nightmare decades ago. After years of derivative viruses building on top of each other like a biological game of telephone, Wesker looked at the whole lineage and said, no, give me the raw material. He and Tricell built their research facility in West Africa, right next to an abandoned Umbrella lab inside the caverns of the former Ndapaya kingdom. The same caverns where progenitor was first discovered. Full circle. The name itself tells you everything. Ouroboros. The Greek Ouroboros, a serpent eating its own tail. destruction and creation as the same act. This was Oswell Spencer's eugenics philosophy taken to its logical, horrifying conclusion. Spencer dreamed of a purified humanity. Wesker decided he'd personally make it happen through selective extinction. The infection mechanic is one of the most dramatic in the entire series. Compatible hosts enter a lysogenic stage where the virus mutates them slowly, carefully, potentially creating stable superhumans. Incompatible hosts, runaway mutations that violently rip them apart. But here's where it gets unsettling. The infected biomatter doesn't stop. It continues existing as its own separate entity, not alive, not dead, just a writhing mass of black tendrils that used to be a person. Like Progenitor and G-Virus before it, Ouroboros can repair dead cells and revive deceased organisms. And as of 2011, there was zero known vaccine. Excessive mutations, mental deterioration, organism instability. 3 problems, 0 solutions, and because nothing in this franchise stays contained, a breach in May 2008 resulted in Ouroboros infecting cockroaches. The resulting creatures were designated Reapers, and they were exactly as horrible as that name implies. Alex Wesker later conducted her own investigations into Ouroboros, specifically looking into stabilization procedures, because apparently one Wesker trying to end the world wasn't enough. But if Ouroboros was Wesker's attempt to rewrite humanity through raw progenitor power, the next virus on our list took a very different approach, stitching together the worst parts of everything that came before it into something even more versatile: C-Virus. Every bioweapon we've covered so far had a fatal flaw. T-Virus destroyed your brain. T-Veronica required 15 years of cryogenic sleep. G-Virus turned you into an unrecognizable meat pile. The C-Virus looked at all of them and said, "I'll take the best parts, thanks." The Chrysalid virus is Frankenstein's monster in pathogen form, literally stitched together from the greatest hits of every previous bioweapon. And the development pipeline reads, less like a research project and more like a heist. Step 1. Acquire T-Veronica samples, likely extracted from Manuela Hidalgo in 2002, a girl who'd been kept in a half-transformed state through constant organ transplants. Step 2. Reverse engineer those samples into a new strain called T02 by stripping out the genetic code responsible for uncontrolled mutations. Step 3. Combine T02 with G-Virus obtained from Sherry Birkin's body, where it had been quietly producing G-cells since 1998. The whole operation was orchestrated by Derek Simmons and Dr. Carla Radames of The Family between 2001 and 2009. 8 years of work to build the perfect weapon, and it worked. Direct injection of C-Virus created Javo, the first truly terrifying intelligent bioweapon soldiers in the franchise. These weren't shambling corpses or mindless beasts. Javo retained human-level cognition, could speak, coordinate tactical flanking maneuvers, operate complex weapons, and even drive vehicles. But here's where it gets genuinely nightmarish. When a Javo took damage, the injured body part would instantly mutate in response. Shoot one in the arm, that arm becomes a massive claw. Blow off a leg, it sprouts tentacles. They weaponize the healing process itself, turning every injury into an upgrade. The more you hurt them, the worse your situation got. And that was just the injection method. Aerosolized deployment was achieved through Lopatica creatures, bloated horrors that expelled C-Virus gas from massive pores across their bodies, creating zombies on a tactical scale. You could blanket an entire city block. Experts have identified C-Virus as the only pathogen in the entire franchise that meets every criterion for a real-world global extinction event. Not T-Virus, not G-Virus, not Ouroboros, the C-Virus, which is, not ideal. Then came the enhanced C-Virus, synthesized from Jake Muller's blood. This variant halted mutations at a complete mutation stage while making further mutation the standard response to severe injury. Only 3 samples were ever created, and each one mutated its host in radically different ways. Simmons, Radames, and Piers-Nivans all received doses, and no 2 transformations looked remotely alike. The virus had peaked, the bioweapons arms race had reached its absolute ceiling, and then it ended. The anti-C vaccine was developed in 2013, rendering C-Virus militarily obsolete almost overnight. The most dangerous pathogen ever engineered, neutralized by a needle. Sometimes the arms race doesn't end with a bigger bomb. It ends with a better shield. But if you think the franchise was done introducing new horrors after that, you clearly haven't met the thing growing underneath an Eastern European village. Bold, Megamycete, Every bioweapon we've talked about so far was built in a lab. Someone in a white coat took a virus, stuck it in a test tube, and tried to make it worse. The mold didn't need any of that. It was already worse, it was already smarter, and it had been sitting under an Eastern European mountain range for longer than anyone can calculate, just waiting. In 1919, a biologist named Miranda stumbled into a cave system beneath her village and discovered something that shouldn't exist: the megamycete, a vast fungal supercolony taking the rough shape of a human fetus with countless tendrils extending through rock and soil in every direction, a giant fungal baby buried underground, which is, not ideal, but here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. The megamycete isn't just a big mushroom, it's a biological hard drive. Every organism that makes physical contact with the mold gets absorbed, and the megamycete stores their genetic code, their memories, and their conscious minds. Countless human consciousnesses exist inside this thing, pulled from buried corpses the fungal network consumed over centuries. The dead don't rest in this region, they get uploaded, and through something called the realm of consciousness, mold-connected humans can communicate with the superorganism through lucid dreams. It's not just storing people, it's talking to them. The mechanism behind all of this is quorum sensing, a real biochemical communication process where molecule concentrations trigger coordinated responses across an entire infected population. Think of it as a biological internet. Every fungal cluster exchanges thoughts and memories with every other cluster, creating a distributed collective consciousness across the entire network. One organism, millions of nodes, zero central failure point. Now, a shady organization called The Connections got their hands on mold samples in the 1990s and immediately asked the worst possible question: can we weaponize this? Turns out yes. They created E-type bioweapons by infecting human embryos with the mold and cultivating them over roughly 40 weeks. The result was Eveline, a creature that looked like a child but could project hallucinations directly into infected minds. Voices, whispers, full psychological warfare designed to shatter conscious resistance until brainwashing took over completely. Disguise a bioweapon as a child refugee, infiltrate an enemy position, and have her mentally enslave every soldier in the building. One of the darkest ideas this franchise has ever produced. Miranda herself demonstrated horizontal gene transfer, absorbing DNA from any organism she touched and building a living archive of biological templates she could deploy at will. Physical mold infection produces a pale greenish skin tone from fungal cells penetrating the host's body, though hosts who resisted neurological control retained normal skin. Ethan Winters and Carl Heisenberg both carried the infection, without looking like walking compost heaps, because the mold never fully hijacked their minds. Every previous bioweapon in this franchise was a tool someone built. The mold is something that was already there, already thinking, already collecting. It makes the T-Virus look like a science fair project, but if you think the megamycete itself is disturbing, wait until you see what Miranda created using it as raw material. Cut out! Every virus, parasite, and fungal nightmare we've covered so far was built in a lab by a corporation, a government, or a megalomaniac with a god complex. The Cadu was built by a grieving mother in a Romanian village, and somehow it's the most sophisticated bioweapon in the entire franchise. Here's the thing. Mother Miranda didn't have Umbrella's funding. She didn't have Tricell's infrastructure or the family's global intelligence network. What she had was a cave full of ancient, super-intelligent fungus and a dead daughter she refused to let go of. The name Cadu literally translates to gift in Romanian, because Miranda saw these parasites as offerings, presents for hosts she deemed worthy of carrying her daughter's consciousness back into the world. Not military contracts, not global domination, just a mother who wanted her kid back. The Cadu themselves were created from nematodes exposed to the mold, transformed into parasitic vectors capable of rapidly mutating a human host from the inside out. They looked almost identical to the black god at the core of the megamycete, which is not a coincidence. Miranda essentially miniaturized the hive organism. She took a fungal supercolony the size of a cavern system and compressed its core functionality into something she could surgically implant into a single person. That's like shrinking the entire internet into a flash drive and having it actually work. Most hosts died within hours. hours. The mold spread too fast. The body couldn't adapt, and the result was just another lichen howling in the woods. But Miranda had spent decades cataloging genetic templates from the Megamycetes stored biological archive. She knew, down to the individual, who could handle a caduce and who couldn't. Her 4 lords are the proof. Alcina Dimitrescu gained extreme height, functionally stopped aging, and ruled a pseudo-feudal aristocracy for over 60 years while maintaining enough personality to throw lavish dinner parties and murder anyone who annoyed her, which is, not ideal for the local population, but impressive from a bioengineering standpoint. Each lord received a completely different mutation tailored to their specific genetic profile. Heisenberg got electromagnetic control. Beneviento got psychic hallucination projection. Moreau got the short end of the stick. But the point stands. Miranda could customize these parasites like she was writing prescriptions. And that's what makes the Cadu the final synthesis of everything this franchise has been building toward. Take Progenitor's raw mutagenic power, add Las Plagas' neural hijacking and host preservation, layer in the mold's ability to store and transfer consciousness itself. Now put all of that in the hands of one woman who spent a century perfecting the process. Not for profit or power, but because she missed her daughter. Umbrella couldn't do this. Tricell couldn't do this. The family with all their resources couldn't do this. A single biologist in a forgotten Eastern European village, armed with nothing but grief and an ancient fungus, achieved a mastery of biological weaponization that every corporation and government in the series failed to reach. The most advanced bioweapon lineage in Resident Evil history wasn't driven by military ambition or corporate greed. It was driven by a mother who never stopped mourning. The Resident Evil franchise has produced some of the most terrifying bioweapons in gaming history. Viruses that melt flesh, reanimate corpses, and turn entire cities into graveyards. But the very first entry on our ranked list, it was designed to cure cancer. Today I'm breaking down and ranking every single virus in the Resident Evil franchise from least deadly to most deadly, starting with one you've never heard of, TJCCC-203, a cancer cure. In Resident Evil, sitting right there in the official timeline documents, buried where nobody would ever find it. TJCCC-203 scores a 28 out of 100 on our deadliness scale, making it the least threatening entry in the entire franchise. And honestly, it barely qualifies as a threat at all. This virus was never designed to kill anyone. It was designed to save lives. A therapeutic agent built to fight cancer, not create monsters. Here's the thing. TJCCC-203 has never appeared in a single Resident Evil game. Not one. It exists only in supplemental timeline materials, making it the most obscure virus in the entire series by a massive margin. No outbreaks, no BOWs, no body count, just a quiet little footnote proving that somewhere inside the most violent bioweapon franchise in gaming history, somebody tried to do something good. But if you think the list stays this wholesome, you're in for a rough ride. Veronica virus. This is one of those entries where honesty matters more than hype. The Veronica virus scores a 33 out of 100 on our deadliness scale, making it the second least deadly virus on this entire list. And part of that low score comes from the fact that there's barely enough canonical information about it to fill a paragraph. Here's what we know. It's tied to the Ashford family. It traces back to the progenitor lineage, and in some analyses it's treated as a distinct branch separate from T. Veronica. But its standalone mechanics, never fully documented. Capcom essentially treated this virus like connective tissue, a bridge that explains how the Veronica branch feeds into later, far more dangerous creations, and that's actually the most interesting thing about it. When a franchise as lore-heavy as Resident Evil can't be bothered to flesh out an entire virus, that tells you exactly where it sits on the priority list, but the lineage it connects to, that's a completely different story. Ancient virus. Here's something that should blow your mind. The ancient virus is potentially millions of years old. It predates every single virus on this list by an almost incomprehensible margin. And yet, it scores a 42 out of 100 on our deadliness ranking. That's not a typo. The oldest known mutagen in the entire Resident Evil timeline is also one of the least dangerous in terms of measurable impact. Its primary role is narrative. It's linked to Africa origin, mutation histories, and the progenitor lineage, meaning it helps explain why the progenitor virus exists at all. It places the entire bioweapon timeline inside a much longer evolutionary story, stretching back millions of years. But here's the problem. There is almost zero documented outbreak data. No confirmed hosts, no transmission profile, no mortality numbers. It exists as an ancestor, not a weapon. And speaking of ancestors, the virus it eventually gave rise to is one of the most important organisms in franchise history, norovirus. Norovirus scores a 48 out of 100, which edges out SARS coronavirus by a hair. And yes, that is a sentence that would be alarming in literally any other context. Here's the thing about norovirus. In the real world, this is the virus that ruins cruise ships. It's the stomach bug, the thing that shuts down a carnival buffet for 3 days. But apparently, Umbrella's scientists looked at this pathogen and thought, yeah, we can use that. In Resident Evil lore, norovirus is listed as one of several real-world viruses used to produce or augment the franchise's engineered mutagens. That's it. That's the entire role. No standalone outbreak, no BOWs, no named victims, zero dramatic moments. It's purely an ingredient in someone else's bioweapon recipe. So somewhere in an Umbrella lab, a scientist in a hazmat suit was carefully pipetting norovirus into a beaker, contributing to a world-ending experiment, and that same virus was simultaneously making a guy on a Royal Caribbean ship wish he'd never touched the shrimp cocktail. But if you thought norovirus was a strange inclusion, wait until you see the next real-world virus Umbrella decided to weaponize. SARS coronavirus. Here's one that's going to sound weird the second I say it. Yes, the SARS coronavirus exists in Resident Evil lore. No, there's no outbreak. No, there are no BWs created from it. No, you never encounter it in any game. So why is it here? Because Umbrella used it. SARS appears in the franchise as a component virus, raw biological material fed into mutagenic development programs. That's it. It's an ingredient, not a weapon. Think of it like flour in a recipe. Nobody's scared of flour, but it's in the bread that kills you. Now here's the thing. In the real world, SARS has a case fatality rate of roughly 10%. That's genuinely terrifying for a respiratory virus. But its ranking here, 46 out of 100, isn't about real-world danger. It's about what Capcom actually did with it in canon, which is basically nothing. 0 named creatures, 0 documented outbreaks, 0 gameplay presence. Just a line in the lore files confirming it was part of the toolkit. But if you think these background viruses are underwhelming, we're about to leave the minor leagues entirely. Ebola virus. Here's where things get a little weird. Ebola is a real virus, like a real actual virus that exists in our world right now. And in Resident Evil lore, Umbrella's scientists used it as a building block, an ingredient in their mutagenic recipes. In reality, Ebola kills between 25% and 90% of everyone it infects depending on the strain. Hemorrhagic fever, organ failure, internal bleeding so severe it's considered one of the most terrifying pathogens on the planet. And Capcom looked at that and said, yeah, we can use that as a starter kit. Ebola never gets its own canonical outbreak in the games. No Ebola level, no Ebola boss fight. It exists purely as a referenced component, something Umbrella pulled off the shelf because they needed its cellular destruction properties to make their engineered viruses nastier. The most lethal real pathogen available, treated like a spice in the recipe. That earns it a 45 out of 100. This is the last real-world entry on our list. Every virus from here on out is purely fictional, purely engineered, and built to make Ebola look quaint, starting with one that Umbrella designed to do something nobody expected. Progenitor virus. Every virus we've talked about so far is a descendant, every single one. The T virus, the G virus, the C virus, Ouroboros. All of them trace back to this. The progenitor virus is the root of the entire Resident Evil bioweapon family tree, and it wasn't created in a lab. It was found in nature. Deep in West Africa, there's a rare flower called the Stairway to the Sun. Beautiful name for something that would eventually destroy millions of lives. The progenitor virus occurs naturally within this flower, and when Umbrella discovered it, they immediately recognized its mutagenic potential. This wasn't a weapon yet. It was a blueprint. A biological foundation that Umbrella's scientists could twist, refine, and weaponize into every nightmare the franchise has ever produced. Here's the thing, though. In its natural state, the progenitor virus isn't a world-ending threat. It's not airborne. It's not spreading through cities. It required Umbrella's engineering to become truly catastrophic, which is exactly why it scores a 52 out of 100. Middle of the pack. That feels wrong for the virus that started everything, but the ranking reflects what it actually does, not what its children became. Think of it this way. Progenitor is the seed. Everything above it on this list is what grew from that seed after humans decided to play God with it. And the next virus on our list, it took that seed and turned it into something with a body count that makes progenitor look like a common cold. NE-T virus. You know Mr. X, the giant in the trench coat who stalks you through the Raccoon City Police Department, punching through walls and making you question every door you open. But most people have zero idea what actually created him. Meet the NET virus. This wasn't some accidental mutation. The NET was engineered by Umbrella with a specific goal: build smarter, stronger bioweapons. The standard T-virus could produce basic tyrants, but Umbrella wanted BOWs that could follow orders, think tactically, and operate as controllable battlefield weapon. The NET was their answer, and it's directly responsible for the entire T-103 production line, better known as Mr. X. Here's the thing though, despite creating one of the franchise's most terrifying enemies, the NET score is just 38 out of 100 on our deadliness ranking. That sounds low, but it makes sense. The NET was never designed to start a pandemic. It has almost zero spread potential. You can't catch it from a bite. It doesn't go airborne. It exists purely to make monsters in a lab, and that caps its threat ceiling significantly. But if a purpose-built weapon virus scoring this low surprises you, wait until you see what a virus designed to literally erase humanity can do. Tough Phobos virus. Most viruses on this list don't care how you feel. They infect, they mutate, they kill. T-Phobos is different. This thing is literally powered by your emotions. T-Phobos is a fear-reactive variant of the T-virus lineage, and its mechanism is one of the most creative concepts Capcom has ever put into a game. The virus sits dormant inside a host's body, and the more afraid that host becomes, the faster the mutation accelerates. Panic literally transforms you. Your own fear response becomes a biological feedback loop that rewrites your DNA in real time. It shows up in Resident Evil Revelations 2, where it's used as a control mechanism. Infected subjects are kept docile as long as they suppress their fear. Stay calm, stay human, lose your composure, and the virus eats you alive from the inside out. That makes it as much a psychological weapon as a biological one. T-Phobos scores a 60 out of 100 on our deadliness scale. There's limited spread data and zero documented mass outbreaks, which keeps the score moderate. But the concept alone is arguably the most psychologically unsettling entry in the entire franchise. Every other virus attacks your body. This one weaponizes your mind. And speaking of viruses that never got their moment in the spotlight, the next one was designed to do something no other entry on this list even attempted: A virus. The A virus was designed to do one thing: kill every human being on the planet, and somehow it still scores a 40 out of 100. Let me explain why. Glenn Arias, a bioterrorist operating completely outside of Umbrella's infrastructure, engineered this virus with 3 distinct variants. Each variant covered a different infection vector, meaning the A virus was built from the ground up to maximize human extinction. 3 variants, 3 ways to spread, 1 goal: total annihilation of the species. So why does it rank so low? Because we barely know anything about it. The A virus appears in Resident Evil Vendetta, a CG animated film, not a mainline game, and that distinction matters. Viruses from the core series get detailed files, lore documents, outbreak data, confirmed casualties. The A virus gets a movie runtime and not much else. The genocidal intent is confirmed. The actual results? Almost zero canonical documentation on transmission rates, outbreak scale, or body count. Here's the thing. A virus designed to end humanity that we know almost nothing about is its own kind of terrifying. But in a ranking based on documented capability, ambition alone doesn't earn points. Capcom really didn't develop this one, and the score reflects that gap between what the A virus wanted to do and what we can actually prove it did. But if you think an underdeveloped extinction weapon is frustrating, wait until you meet a virus that activates based on something you can't control: your own fear. T. Veronica virus. Picture this. A 12-year-old genius, one of the smartest minds Umbrella ever produced, creates a brand new virus by combining the progenitor virus with an ancient retrovirus extracted from queen ant DNA. Then she injects herself with it. Then she climbs into a cryogenic pod and goes to sleep for 15 years. That's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what Alexia Ashford did. Here's why. T. Veronica is so absurdly aggressive that any conscious host is destroyed by it almost immediately. The virus rewrites your DNA so fast and so violently that your mind can't survive the process. The only way to achieve symbiosis, to actually gain the extraordinary physical abilities the ant DNA component makes possible, is to slow your entire body to near-death levels and let the virus integrate over more than a decade. Alexia understood this, so she sacrificed 15 years of her life on a gamble that she'd wake up superhuman. And it worked. She emerged with abilities that made her one of the most dangerous beings in the entire franchise. But anyone who skipped the cryo sleep, they weren't so lucky. Steve Burnside is the perfect example. Injected with T. veronica without the slow integration process, he mutated violently and uncontrollably, losing his mind entirely. The virus didn't enhance him, it consumed him. That's what makes T. veronica so fascinating. It's not just a weapon, it's a 15-year commitment with zero guarantee of survival, and the only person patient enough to see it through was a child. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now. Las Plagas. Every virus on this list so far kills its host. Las Plagas doesn't. It takes over their mind and turns them into a weapon while they're still breathing. Las Plagas isn't a virus at all. It's a parasitic organism, and it represents the biggest conceptual shift in the entire Resident Evil franchise. Once inside the body through spores or ingested eggs, the parasite invades the nervous system, overrides autonomous behavior, and hands full control to whoever's pulling the strings. The Ganados you fight in Resident Evil 4 aren't zombies. They're conscious functioning people whose bodies no longer belong to them, and it gets worse with every variant. Type 2 and 3 Plagas show increasing sophistication in host manipulation, but Type 4 is where things go apocalyptic. A Type 4 Plaga can control other BOWs like Lickers, turning a single infected host into the commander of an entire biological army. That's not an infection. That's a military structure. Here's where the real threat escalates. During RE4, Ada Wong extracted a Plaga sample and delivered it directly to Albert Wesker. His plan? Worldwide infection. Not to kill people, but to control them. That mind control capability at global scale is what pushes Las Plagas to a 62 out of 100, above viruses with significantly higher raw lethality. Because a virus that kills you is dangerous. A parasite that makes you kill for someone else is something far worse. But if mind control sounds bad, wait until you see what the next virus does to the ocean itself. Tiabias virus. Picture a luxury cruise ship. Chandeliers swinging, ballrooms echoing, the whole thing drifting through open water with zero contact to the outside world. Now fill it with some of the most aggressive mutations the Resident Evil franchise has ever produced. That's the Queen Zenobia, and that's exactly what the T-Abyss virus turned it into. The T-Abyss virus scores a 66 out of 100 on our deadliness scale, and the reason comes down to one word: hybridization. Researchers took the Abyss virus, a deep-sea pathogen with terrifyingly fast mutation rates, and grafted T-virus genes directly onto it. The result was something that infected faster and hit harder than either parent virus alone. The Abyss base gave it that relentless deep ocean mutation speed. The T-virus genetics expanded the host range far beyond marine organisms, meaning it could now tear through anything biological, not just fish. The bioterrorist group Il Veltro deployed it aboard the Queen Zenobia in Resident Evil Revelations, and the marine setting wasn't just for atmosphere. It directly reflected the Abyss virus's origins in the crushing depths of the ocean. Here's the thing though, what makes T-Abyss genuinely scary isn't just what it does, it's what we don't know about stopping it. There is virtually zero reliable containment data for this specific strain. No documented vaccine, no proven countermeasure. A virus engineered purely for speed and aggression with nothing confirmed to shut it down is a nightmare scenario, but if a hybrid virus with no known cure sounds bad, wait until you hear about the pure strain it was built from. Abyss virus. A 99.76% blood transmission rate. Let that satisfying, terrifying number sink in for a second. The Abyss virus doesn't need to be airborne. It doesn't need to be engineered into a weapon. It just needs to touch your blood, and you're done. That single statistic makes it one of the most efficiently spreading pathogens in the entire Resident Evil franchise. But here's the thing that actually makes the Abyss virus scarier than most entries on this list. Nobody made it. Umbrella didn't cook this up in a lab. No rogue scientist spent decades perfecting it. The Abyss virus is naturally occurring, a marine origin pathogen that evolved in deep ocean environments completely on its own. It was sitting at the bottom of the ocean, in crushing pressure and total darkness, mutating and perfecting itself long before any corporation ever dreamed of bioweapon. And when it crosses into surface organisms, the results are rapid and catastrophic. The mutations it produces are adapted to extreme deep sea conditions, so when those same properties hit a normal biological system, the host essentially gets rewritten at a speed that most engineered viruses can't match. Scoring a 70 out of 100 on our deadline Linus scale. The Abyss virus earns its place not through some villain's master plan, but through millions of years of natural selection in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. That's the part that should keep you up at night. Every other virus on this list exists because someone decided to play God. The Abyss virus was already out there, waiting, and it didn't need anyone's help to become a nightmare. But if a naturally occurring deep-sea pathogen unsettles you, wait until you see what happens when someone actually weaponizes it. Ouroboros. Every virus on this list was built to infect. Ouroboros was built to judge. This is Albert Wesker's masterpiece. Derived from the progenitor virus and refined using Jill Valentine's T-virus antibodies to reduce its raw toxicity, Ouroboros does something no other pathogen in this franchise attempts. It sorts humanity into two categories, the worthy and the unworthy, and it does it with zero mercy. Here's how it works. If your DNA is compatible, the virus adapts to your body, reshapes your genetics, and grants you extraordinary physical abilities. You evolve, but if your DNA is incompatible, and this is the vast majority of the human population, black cysts erupt across your body and consume you from the outside in. You don't mutate. You don't turn into a zombie. You just die horribly. There is no middle ground. Evolve or be destroyed. And Wesker's plan wasn't to use this on a battlefield. He wanted to launch it globally via missile strike, blanketing the entire planet. Ouroboros wasn't a weapon of war. It was forced evolution on a species-wide scale. Billions dead, a handful of enhanced survivors, and Wesker sitting at the top as a self-appointed god of the new world. The virus scores a 78 out of 100 on our deadliness scale, and it's potentially extinct after the events of Resident Evil 5. Not because anyone cured it. The samples were simply lost. That's the only thing that stopped it. But if Ouroboros sounds like the peak of what Resident Evil has to offer, the top 3 viruses on this list are about to prove you wrong. G-Virus. Most Resident Evil viruses create a monster. The G-Virus creates a monster that never stops becoming something worse. William Birkin spent his entire career building this thing, and what he produced is arguably the most terrifying piece of biological engineering in the entire franchise. The G-Virus is the first artificial virus to fully tap the potential of the progenitor virus, and it doesn't just surpass the T-Virus in regenerative capability. It makes the T-Virus look like a rough draft. Here's what separates the G-Virus from everything else on this list. When the T-Virus infects someone, you get a zombie, a licker, a tyrant. The mutation stabilizes into a form and stays there. The G-Virus doesn't do that. Infection drives continuous, uncontrolled mutation. Hosts progress through stages, G1 through G5, and each stage is more powerful and less recognizably human than the last. There is no ceiling. The host just keeps evolving until there's nothing left that even resembles a person. But the truly alien part is the G-embryo. The G-Virus can produce embryos that the host implants into other organisms, creating a reproductive cycle that spreads infection through a completely different vector than bites or airborne spores. And if the recipient has incompatible DNA, the embryo doesn't bond with them. It hatches inside them and tears its way out. That's one of the most viscerally disturbing infection outcomes in the entire series, and it's not even the saddest part of this virus's story. The G-Virus traces back to Lisa Trevor, an Umbrella test subject who survived repeated experimental infections that should have killed her dozens of times over. Her unique antibodies gave Birkin the key insight he needed to isolate the G-Virus. She was a prisoner, a child when the experiment started, and her suffering became the foundation for one of the deadliest bioweapons ever created. But if the G-Virus is this devastating at an individual level, wait until you see what happens when someone engineers a virus that combines its mutation potential with the T. Veronica's power scaling. C-Virus. Take everything dangerous about the T. Veronica virus and the G-Virus, smash them together, and you get something that honestly shouldn't exist. The C-Virus is a second-generation hybrid, and it inherited the worst properties of 2 of the most dangerous viruses we've already covered. It scores an 85 out of 100, and once you understand what it does, you'll wonder why it isn't number 1. The C-Virus is RNA-based and attacks red blood cells directly, deteriorating them to produce infected humans, called JAVO. Here's the thing about JAVO. They're not zombies. They retain enough cognitive function to use weapons, coordinate tactics, and work together. That alone makes them exponentially more dangerous than anything anything the T-virus ever produced. But the real nightmare is the chrysalis mechanic. When a Javo takes enough damage in combat, it doesn't just die. It enters a chrysalis state, a cocoon, and emerges as a completely different, more powerful mutation. The virus literally uses the damage you deal to its hosts as fuel for their next evolution. Every bullet you fire is just accelerating the problem. That's a genuinely terrifying concept for a bioweapon. And transmission? Forget bites. The C-virus spreads through injection or aerosolized clouds, which dramatically expands how it can be deployed at scale. On top of the Javo and chrysalis pathways, it can also revive dead tissue and reanimate corpses. That's 3 separate infection outcomes from a single virus. No other virus on this list covers that much ground. The anti-C vaccine does exist, developed from Jake Muller's antibodies, but it only works if deployed before the chrysalis stage completes, creating a treatment window so narrow that large-scale containment becomes nearly impossible. The C virus covers more bases than anything we've discussed so far, but somehow it still isn't the deadliest virus in Resident Evil. T-virus. This is the one that's going to make people angry. Scoring 88 out of 100, the T-virus isn't just the most iconic virus in Resident Evil, it's the most deadly. And I know exactly what you're thinking. The G-virus mutates harder. The C-virus creates chrysalid nightmares. Ouroboros was literally designed to end civilization. How does the original zombie virus beat all of them? Because deadliness isn't about spectacle. It's about results. The T-virus was engineered by Umbrella from the progenitor virus, and it became the foundation of the entire franchise's bioweapon ecosystem. Zombies, lickers, tyrants, dozens of BOWs across over 25 years of games. Every single one traces back to this thing, but that's legacy, not lethality. Here's where it actually wins. The T-virus has the widest confirmed host range in the franchise. It infects humans, animals, insects, plants. It doesn't care, and its transmission model is self-sustaining. One bite creates another carrier, and that carrier bites someone else, and the chain never stops. No laboratory needed, no delivery system, no cult-performing rituals, just teeth. The Raccoon City incident is the benchmark. A single city, partially contained, and the only way to stop it was a nuclear strike. The virus spread to that scale through ordinary zombie bites in under a week. Think about that. The United States government looked at every option available and decided the only answer was to erase an entire city from the map, and Umbrella never stopped refining it. The Epsilon strain, the T103 Tyrant line, Mr. X, decades of in-universe research and iteration, made the T-virus the most actively developed bioweapon in the series. Nothing else even comes close in terms of documented deployment. The counterintuitive lesson of this entire ranking is simple. The most dangerous virus isn't the one with the most extreme mutations or the most ambitious design. It's the one that spreads the easiest, has been deployed the most, and has the highest confirmed body count. The G-virus is scarier in a lab, Ouroboros is scarier in theory, but the T-virus is scarier in practice because it already won, multiple times, across multiple games, and they needed a nuke to even slow it down. That's why it sits at number 1. Not because it's the flashiest, because when you measure actual damage done, nothing else in this franchise comes close. Every virus in Resident Evil can trace its lineage back to one single organism. Something older than civilization, older than agriculture, older than recorded history, and it kills almost everyone it touches. Today, I'm ranking every major Resident Evil virus from least to most deadly, and the one at the top might not be what you expect. Let's start at the foundation, progenitor virus. Here's the thing about the progenitor virus. It's not a bioweapon. It was never designed to be one. It's a naturally occurring pathogen that has existed since roughly 10,000 BCE, quietly infecting members of the West African Ndapaya tribe through a flower called the Sonentrepa. That's thousands of years before anyone thought to put a virus in a briefcase. It wasn't officially discovered until the 1960s, when Oswell Spencer, Edward Ashford, and James Marcus found it in West Africa, an RNA-based retrovirus capable of something impossible. Reversing cellular lysis. It can bring dead cells back to life, which is, not ideal. But here's the kicker. It kills almost everyone it infects. Only a tiny fraction of humans possess the genetic compatibility to survive, and those rare survivors walk away with superhuman abilities. Everyone else just dies. No zombification, no slow mutation, just death. So why is it ranked last? Because you can't weaponize something that only spreads through eating one specific flower in one specific cave. Its transmission vector is essentially zero without refinement. Per infection, it might be the deadliest thing on this list. But extinction potential? It needs help. And that help came in the form of every single virus we're about to cover. Every T-virus zombie, every tyrant, every mutant abomination exists because someone looked at this ancient god virus and thought, I can make this worse. But if you think something that kills on contact sounds bad, wait until you hear about a virus that weaponizes the one thing you can't control, your own fear. T. Phobos virus. Every other virus on this list infects you through biology. A bite, a needle, contaminated water. T. Phobos doesn't care about any of that. It infects you through your own mind. Developed by Alex Wesker's research team on Sign Island, the T. Phobos virus is a retrovirus descended directly from the progenitor virus, but with one critical difference. Its trigger mechanism isn't physical contact or airborne exposure, it's fear. The virus lies dormant in your system until your body produces enough stress hormones, and the moment you feel genuine terror, it activates. Within seconds, your body starts mutating. Think about that for a second. The more scared you get, the faster you die, and you're on an island full of monsters. Good luck staying calm. The entire native population of Cyan Island was wiped out this way. Every single inhabitant transformed into creatures called the Afflicted, which is, not ideal. The virus also showed a preference for male hosts, with female carriers exhibiting entirely different mutation pathways, suggesting the thing was rewriting biology along gender-specific lines that nobody fully understands. Here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. Hosts who experienced irregular mutations didn't just lose their minds. They developed mania and euphoria after transforming. Their own fear killed them, and then their mutated bodies felt great about it. A psychological feedback loop designed by a woman who wanted to create perfect superhumans with zero side effects. She got demons instead. Every single one of them. But the saving grace, if you can call it that, is scope. T. Phobos never left Sign Island. One contained outbreak, one dead population. Conceptually terrifying, practically limited. But if you think psychological horror is bad, wait until you hear what happened when a 12-year-old genius with an obsession engineers her own virus. T. Veronica virus. Every virus we've talked about so far has the same fundamental problem. You infect someone, their brain rots, and you get a shambling idiot that can barely open a door. Alexia Ashford looked at that and said, no, actually, I want my monsters to think. And she wasn't just theorizing. She built it. Project Code. Veronica took the progenitor base and spliced in queen insect egg DNA alongside plant genetic material. The goal wasn't just mutation. It was mutation without the cognitive collapse. Where the T virus destroys higher brain function as a side effect of cellular breakdown, T Veronica was specifically engineered to halt that decay entirely. You mutate, you grow stronger, you sprout things that shouldn't be growing out of a human body, but you keep your mind the entire time. Here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. Alexia didn't just create the virus. She injected herself with it voluntarily, then put herself into cryogenic sleep for 15 years to let it bond properly. When she woke up in December 1998, right as HCF was raiding Rockford Island, she could transform at will, sprouting wings, generating combustible blood she could weaponize as projectiles, merging with plant matter to expand her reach across entire environments, all while maintaining full strategic intelligence and the ability to revert back. That's not a zombie. That's not even a bioweapon in the traditional sense. That's closer to a god with a biology degree. The virus also granted hosts the ability to manipulate vegetation and create organic projectile weapons, essentially turning the surrounding environment into an extension of the infected body. You're not fighting a person anymore. You're fighting an ecosystem that hates you. And historically, T. Veronica matters beyond its own outbreak. It served as a crucial stepping stone for the C virus, proving that intelligence preservation during mutation wasn't just possible but replicable. Alexia was the proof of concept. But if T. Veronica solved the brain problem, the G virus took a completely different approach to evolution, one that makes Alexia's controlled transformations look almost polite by comparison. G virus. Here's the thing about the G virus. Every other pathogen on this list infects you and turns you into something. The G virus infects you and then keeps turning you into something else, and then something else, and then something else again. It never stops. There is no final form. There's just the next mutation. William Birkin discovered it in 1988, but the story actually starts decades earlier. Back in the 1960s, Umbrella was running experiments on a woman named Lisa Trevor. They implanted an NE-alpha parasite into her body expecting the usual results, but Lisa's body rejected it. And here's where it gets weird. Instead of dying, her cells absorbed the parasite's genome and spliced it into her own DNA. Her body created something entirely new. Birkin isolated that anomaly and spent the next 2 decades turning it into the G virus. What makes it genuinely terrifying is the speed. Direct injection causes mutation within seconds. Not hours, not days, seconds. Birkin stabbed himself with it while bleeding out from gunshot wounds, and his body immediately began restructuring itself into what fans call the G1 form. From there, every time he sustained enough environmental damage, he mutated again. G2, G3, G4, G5, each form progressively less human and more powerful. Evolution with absolutely zero breaks. But the real nightmare detail that nobody talks about enough is the reproduction. G mutants can reproduce asexually. T-virus creatures are universally infertile, which is basically nature's safety valve. The G-virus doesn't have that safety valve. One G-mutant could theoretically spawn an entire population. Brian Irons, Ben Bertolucci, Curtis Miller, they all demonstrate the same thing. Once G-virus takes hold, the host becomes an uncontrollable engine of body horror that just keeps escalating. So why isn't it ranked higher? Because you can't aim it. You can't deploy it strategically. You can't build an army with something that won't stop mutating long enough to follow orders. It's a loaded gun that shoots in every direction, including back at you. But if you think uncontrollable mutation is scary, wait until you see what happens when a virus actually cooperates with its creators. T-virus. Here's the thing about the T-virus. Every other pathogen on this list is theoretical carnage, potential destruction, could be apocalypses. The T-virus already did it. Over 100,000 people dead in a single event, and the United States government had to nuke an American city off the map just to stop the bleeding. That's not a hypothetical. That's a Tuesday in Raccoon City. Dr. James Marcus achieved his breakthrough on January 13, 1978, combining the progenitor virus with leech DNA to create what would formally be designated the tyrant virus. And from that moment forward, it became the single most deployed bioweapon in human history. Not because it's the most complex, not because it creates the scariest monsters, but because it works. Every single time. The transmission vectors alone are a nightmare. Airborne, waterborne, direct injection, contact with infected fluids. You could catch this thing from breathing near the wrong air vent, drinking tap water, or getting sneezed on by someone who's already 3 days into necrosis. The virus causes what's clinically called cannibal disease, which is, not a great name for something you want to survive. Progressive tissue death, catastrophic brain damage, and then full reanimation of dead tissue. You die, and then your body gets back up and starts eating people. Cool, but the zombies are just the baseline. The T-virus also produced tyrants like Mr. X and Nemesis, hunters, lickers, and dozens of other bioorganic weapons depending on the host's genetics and exposure method. One virus, an entire army's worth of monsters. And Raccoon City wasn't the only outbreak. The T-virus showed up globally, over and over, proving that containment is basically a fantasy once this thing gets loose. Nothing in the franchise matched its confirmed body count from a single incident until the C-virus came along years later. That's decades of being the reigning champion of mass death, but at least the T-virus needs land to spread. The next virus on our list doesn't even need dry ground. T-ABSS, virus. Every virus on this list so far has one thing in common: they're land problems. Infect a city, infect a building, infect an island. Containable, at least in theory. The T-Abyss virus doesn't care about your quarantine perimeters because it was built for the ocean. In 2003, someone looked at Umbrella's perfected T-virus and thought, you know what this needs? Deep sea genetics. They combined it with an abyssal retrovirus pulled from the Kermadec Trench, one of the deepest points on Earth, and created something that infects land-based and aquatic organisms simultaneously, which is, not ideal. The virus restructures its host by breaking down fat tissue while strengthening the muscular and skeletal systems, essentially rebuilding you into something adapted for water. Fins. Gelatinous tissue. The works. Infected humans become ooze, these shambling translucent nightmares that look like someone left a person in a bathtub for 6 months. Others become sea creepers, skag dead, or globsters, each one more horrifying and more aquatic than the last. Here's where it gets scary on a planetary scale. The Terra Grigia panic in 2004 proved T-Abyss works on urban populations. The bioterrorist group Il Veltro unleashed it on an entire floating city, and the result was catastrophic enough that the whole place had to be destroyed. A year later, the Queen Zenobia incident saw 3 cruise ships, each carrying roughly 2,000 people, turned into floating morgues full of aquatic abominations. But those are contained outbreaks. The real nightmare scenario is open water contamination. T-Abyss can jump from humans to marine organisms and trigger chain reactions through entire ecosystems. Microbes to fish to whales. One infected coastline could cascade through the food chain from the bottom up, and nobody has a quarantine protocol for the Pacific Ocean. Most viruses threaten cities cities, T-Abyss threatens 70% of the planet's surface. But if you think environmental devastation is unsettling, wait until you hear about the virus that turns your own mind into the weapon. Virus. Forget underground labs. Forget mutant monsters in sewers. The A-virus is a bioweapon delivered through bottled water, and that's what makes it the most terrifyingly modern virus in this entire franchise. Created by arms dealer Glenn Arias, the A-virus is a level 4 classification pathogen built around a 3-component system. Component 1 is the latent virus, which sits dormant in your body doing absolutely nothing. Component 2 is the trigger virus, which activates the infection on command. Component 3 is the vaccine, which cures it on command. You see the problem here. Arias dispersed the latent virus into the Great Lakes water supply through his company, Agwem Industries, which sold contaminated bottled water to the public. One of the largest freshwater systems in North America, just casually poisoned through a commercial product you'd grab at a gas station. The Great Lakes murders produced roughly 14 casualties. The Institute of Biotechnology attack killed 6. Then came the New York bioterrorist attack, which resulted in over 100 deaths across Manhattan. But the body count isn't what makes this one scary. Here's the thing. Every other virus on this list, once it's out, it's out. You can't put it back in the bottle. The A-virus flips that entirely. You release the latent strain to millions of people through drinking water, and nobody even knows they're infected. Then whenever you want, you trigger it, cure it, trigger it again. You've essentially built a remote control for a zombie apocalypse. The infections cause cannibal disease similar to the T-virus, violent tendencies, loss of higher brain function, cannibalistic behavior. But unlike the T-virus, the controller decides when it starts and when it stops. One person with access to the trigger component could hold an entire city hostage indefinitely. Scale that up to a national water supply and you're looking at extinction-level potential from a single actor with a grudge and a bottling plant, which is, not ideal. But if you think controllable zombies sound bad, wait until you see what happens when someone combines multiple virus strains into one package and lets it loose on a global scale. See virus. Every virus we've covered so far has one thing in common. They were contained. One city, one island, one facility. The C-virus broke that pattern completely. Created by Carla Radames, this thing is essentially a greatest hits album of everything that came before it. She took genes from T. Veronica, spliced in properties from the G-virus, and produced something that combines the worst features of both into a single deployable package. It's the Frankenstein's monster of bioweapons, except Frankenstein's monster didn't kill over 100,000 people across multiple countries simultaneously. Here's what makes the C-virus uniquely terrifying. It has 2 completely separate infection methods, and each one creates a different type of threat. Direct injection produces Javo, infected soldiers that retain their intelligence, can use weapons, coordinate tactics, and communicate with each other. They're not shambling corpses bumping into walls. They're shooting back at you. Meanwhile, airborne gas dispersal creates standard zombies, the classic mindless horde. So picture this. You're fighting an organized military force and a zombie apocalypse at the same time, which is, not ideal. But here's where it gets worse. The regenerative properties in this virus are so advanced that Javo can spontaneously mutate damaged body parts into entirely new appendages mid-combat. You shoot an arm off, it grows back as something worse. A wing, a shield, a blade. They adapt to whatever's killing them in real time. I don't know what to tell you. That's just what it does. And if you're hoping for a cure, don't. The anti-C vaccine that was eventually developed had a near 0% survival rate for anyone who had fully transformed into a Javo or complete mutant. Once the mutation completes, you're done. There's no coming back. The 2012-2013 outbreaks hit multiple countries at the same time, confirmed casualties exceeding 100,000. That's not a theoretical body count. That's not a projection. That's documented. The C-virus didn't just threaten an apocalypse. It actually delivered one, and it took a global coordinated response to stop it from going further. But if you think a virus that already proved it could end the world is scary, wait until you hear about one that was specifically designed to do it on purpose. Ouroboros. Every virus on this list was built to create weapons. Ouroboros was built to end the species. Between 2003 and 2009, Albert Wesker and Tricell's African branch, led by Excella Gione, developed something that makes every other pathogen in this franchise look like a science fair project. Ouroboros wasn't designed to make monsters. It wasn't designed to create super soldiers or controllable armies. It was designed to kill 99.99% of the human population and leave behind only those who shared specific genetic markers with the ancient Ndapaya king. Here's the thing. Every virus we've talked about today represents a piece of the puzzle. Progenitor's selectivity, the T-virus's raw lethality, the G-virus's evolutionary potential. Wesker took all of it, refined it, and created the logical endpoint, a deliberate, targeted extinction event disguised as evolution. The disease progresses through two distinct stages, each worse than the last. But unlike the C-virus or T-abyss, there's no zombie army, no mutant horde, just death. Quiet, efficient, species-ending death for everyone who doesn't meet Wesker's genetic criteria, which is, basically everyone alive. In March 2009, the final testing phase began in Kijuju, Africa. Wesker was hours from global deployment. Hours. Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar stopped it at the last possible moment, and I genuinely mean the last possible moment. This wasn't a we found the lab 6 months early situation. This was a the missile is basically fueled situation. After Wesker died, samples were recovered and brought to Sign Island. They were never successfully redeployed. The closest the Resident Evil franchise ever came to actual human extinction was stopped by 2 BSAA agents and a volcano. So which Resident Evil virus is the deadliest? Ouroboros. Not because of its body count, which is relatively small, but because it is the only virus on this list where the intent was total human extinction and the capability matched the ambition. Every other virus created monsters by accident or design. Ouroboros was going to create a graveyard the size of the planet. Resident Evil has unleashed biological nightmares that redefined survival horror for 30 years. Every outbreak, every mutation, every impossible transformation traces back to viruses that shouldn't exist in nature. That's why today, I'm breaking down the 8 deadliest viruses in Resident Evil and the horrifying science behind each one, starting with the infection that created everything, the T-virus. The T-virus is supposed to create mindless zombies that shamble toward prey and bite, and that works perfectly fine for most infected, except certain subjects retain full consciousness and tactical intelligence for weeks after exposure, which makes zero biological sense. Dr. James Marcus created the T-virus in the 1970s by combining the progenitor virus with leech DNA. The result was a retrovirus that hijacks living cells through reverse transcription. The viral RNA translates into DNA, integrates into the host genome, and forces cells to replicate the virus. Within 6 to 12 hours of exposure, the virus spreads through the bloodstream to neural pathways. It causes massive necrosis and severe brain damage. Then it reanimates the corpse. The infected lose all reasoning and empathy, but retain movement and primal aggression. The Raccoon City outbreak on September 28, 1998 killed over 100,000 people in under 48 hours. The Arklay laboratory incidents between May and July 1998 produced the first documented Crimson Heads. Every single test subject in the Arklay facility died within 72 hours of T-virus exposure. But then you check the research files from the Epsilon strain. The VAC-T process, which stands for Vector Accelerated Cognition Transmission, doesn't just reanimate corpses, it enhances them. The Epsilon strain created what Umbrella called Crimson Heads. These weren't standard zombies. Security footage from the Spencer Mansion shows infected coordinating ambush patterns. They open doors. They use basic tools. File report 2847 from July 1998 documents one subject who retained enough cognitive function to operate a keypad lock. That's not mindless reanimation. That's selective consciousness preservation. Players who examined Arklay laboratory records found something worse. Test subjects who received controlled T-virus doses showed unusual patterns. Some retained memories for 72 hours post-infection. Lab notes explicitly mention Subject 0214, who spoke coherently about his family 3 days after injection, right before final degradation. The research team noted he could recognize faces, respond to questions, and express fear. Then his higher brain functions collapsed. Here's what breaks the established science. The T-virus destroys the prefrontal cortex. That's the area responsible for reasoning, planning, and impulse control. But Crimson Heads demonstrate tactical thinking that requires an intact prefrontal cortex. Security recordings show them testing doors before attacking, retreating when outnumbered, and flanking prey from multiple angles. Those behaviors require neural pathways the virus is supposed to destroy. Dr. Marcus mentions this paradox exactly once in a classified memo dated June 12, 1978. Certain subjects demonstrate cognitive retention that contradicts viral mechanisms. Further study required. When you search for that further study in the files, you find nothing. Umbrella never explained how some infected retain intelligence while others become mindless corpses. That contradiction defined bioweapon research for the next 30 years. Every virus that came after the T-virus tried to solve the same problem. How do you create controlled mutations without destroying the host's intelligence? But if selective consciousness seems impossible, wait until you learn about the virus that forces infinite evolution beyond any biological limits. The G virus. The G virus was designed to create perfect biological evolution with unlimited potential, and it succeeded brilliantly, except every single host mutated into something that kept evolving beyond any biological limits. Forever. William Birkin isolated the G virus in 1988 from Lisa Trevor's mutated cells in the Arklay laboratory. Lisa had survived every virus umbrella injected into her body for 21 years. The progenitor virus, type A, type B, and the experimental NE alpha parasite. Each strain alone had a 100% fatality rate. She integrated all of them. Birkin discovered her body wasn't just surviving viral infection, it was absorbing incompatible genetic code and using it to enhance itself. He extracted that ability and weaponized it. The result was the Golgotha virus, designed for continuous, unlimited mutation. On September 20, 1998, Umbrella Security Service troops shot Birkin to steal his research. He injected himself with G-Virus and transformed. That single injection triggered the outbreak that destroyed Raccoon City 6 days later. But then you track what happened to Birkin after injection. The virus didn't just mutate him once, it forced perpetual evolution. Security footage shows Birkin mutating through 5 distinct forms in under 6 hours. Each transformation was more extreme than the last. Form 1 resembled a hulking humanoid with exposed muscle tissue. Form 2 developed a massive blade arm and enhanced regenerative abilities. Form 3 sprouted eyes across his torso. Form 4 became a quadrupedal nightmare. Form 5 was a barely recognizable mass of teeth, tentacles, and pulsating organs. Lab reports state his cellular structure was rewriting itself every 40 minutes. Sherry Birkin, William's daughter, was infected with a G-virus embryo on September 29, 1998. The embryo was surgically removed within hours. She survived. But here's what the files don't advertise. Her blood retained active G cells for over a decade. In 2009, the US government extracted those cells and used them to create the C virus. That means G virus cells remained viable and active in her bloodstream for 11 years without additional exposure. Research notes from the Nest laboratory explicitly state that G virus embryos can be implanted in non-compatible hosts through chest bursting. If the host body rejects the embryo doesn't die. It births itself, seeks a new host, and tries again. File Report 5512 describes this as autonomous reproductive capability independent of original host viability. That's not a virus. That's a self-aware biological weapon that reproduces and evolves without human intervention. The G-Virus proves something Umbrella spent decades trying to achieve. You can create life that improves itself infinitely. The problem is, you can never control what it becomes. But if infinite mutation seems terrifying, wait until you learn about the parasite that hijacks nervous systems through psychic signals, Las Plagas. Las Plagas isn't a virus at all, and that would be fine, except it achieves hive mind control capabilities across entire populations that no biological organism should be capable of. The Plagas parasite was discovered beneath Salazar Castle in rural Spain by Los Iluminados cult leader Osmond Sadler in 2003. The parasites had been dormant in cave systems for centuries. After the first Castellan Salazar sealed them away, Sadler excavated the site and began breeding programs to create weaponized strains. The parasite exists in 3 forms. Egg form can be ingested. Spore form spreads through airborne contact. Adult form wraps directly around the host's spinal cord and integrates with the central nervous system. Unlike viral infection, Plagas doesn't kill the host. It hijacks complete motor control while leaving cognitive function intact. Infected subjects, called ganados, can speak, use firearms, coordinate tactical operations, and follow complex orders. Leon S. Kennedy encountered Type 1 Plagas during his mission to rescue Ashley Graham in 2004. He documented infected villagers setting traps, operating heavy machinery, and communicating through high-frequency signals. But then you examine how the parasite actually controls hosts across distances. The files describe it as psychic communication, not metaphorically, literally. Every Plagas-infected individual connects to a biological network controlled by whoever holds the dominant strain. Sadler possessed the dominant Plagas, which meant he could command every infected person in the region simultaneously. Research notes from Tricell Corporation describe the communication method as high-frequency neural broadcasting beyond known biological mechanisms. The parasites don't use pheromones or chemical signals. They transmit commands directly between nervous systems. The cross-species compatibility makes this worse. Type 2 and Type 3 Plagas variants, developed by Tricell, successfully infected humans, dogs, bats, insects, and reptiles. Every species remained controllable through the same hive mind network. File report 8834 documents infected animals responding to human hosts' mental commands with zero training period. When Leon killed Sadler on November 17, 2004, every single infected individual in the castle collapsed simultaneously. Security footage recovered later shows Ganados dropping mid-action the exact second Sadler died. That's not just neural hijacking. That's instantaneous network-wide consciousness termination across a 5-kilometer radius. Here's the part that breaks known neuroscience. Type 2 and Type 3. Plagas can survive host death and actively seek new bodies. The Las Plagas removal report from 2005 explicitly states that parasites extracted from deceased hosts remained mobile and attempted to infect nearby personnel. These organisms demonstrated survival instinct and target recognition independent of any nervous system. This proves parasitic intelligence exists outside host consciousness. Las Plagas aren't just controlling bodies, they're thinking for themselves. But if psychic parasites seem impossible, wait until you learn about the virus designed to judge humanity and exterminate 99% of it in under 60 seconds, the Ouroboros virus. Albert Wesker created Ouroboros to evolve humanity into gods with superhuman abilities, and the virus worked perfectly. Except 99% of all hosts dissolve into black tentacled masses in under 60 seconds. Wesker developed Ouroboros in 2006 with Tricell Corporation using the progenitor virus discovered in Ndapaya ruins in West Africa. The virus was designed as biological judgment. Compatible hosts would undergo complete genetic enhancement, gaining incredible strength, superhuman speed, and regenerative immortality. Incompatible hosts would be eliminated instantly. Wesker used Jill Valentine's unique T-virus antibodies as a stabilizing agent after discovering her blood contained proteins that prevented rejection. His plan was simple: release Ouroboros globally via missile dispersal from Tricell facilities. The worthy would ascend, the unworthy would die. He called it forced evolution. Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar stopped the launch on March 8, 2009 at the Kijuju Autonomous Zone. They killed Wesker by overdosing him with Ouroboros serum and destroying him with dual rocket launchers. But then you examine what Ouroboros actually does to incompatible hosts. The transformation isn't gradual, it's instantaneous and irreversible. Incompatible subjects transform within 45 seconds of injection. Their cells are overrun by black tendril-like structures that consume organic tissue from the inside out. The body dissolves into a shapeless parasitic mass controlled by bright orange weak point cores. These cores function as both central nervous system and the creature's only vulnerability. Research notes from the Tricell facility describe the process as complete cellular replacement with zero incubation period. Wesker himself demonstrated what compatibility looks like. After injecting the prototype virus on July 23, 1998, his cellular structure completely rewrote itself in 6 hours. His strength increased by 200%. His speed allowed him to dodge bullets after they left the barrel. His regeneration healed third-degree burns in under 30 seconds. File report 9271 states his aging process stopped entirely at a cellular level. The compatibility rate for Ouroboros was documented at 0.0013%. That's 13 people per million. Wesker's global dispersal plan would have infected approximately 6.7 billion people. The math is simple. 629,129,000 deaths within the first hour. That's not evolution. That's extinction with survivors. Here's what makes this genuinely horrifying. Wesker knew the numbers. The Tricell research files explicitly show projected casualty rates before the planned launch. He saw 99.9987% lethality and called it acceptable losses. His vision of a superior humanity required killing literally everyone else first. This wasn't bioterrorism. This was genocide disguised as philosophy. But if Wesker's judgment virus seems extreme, wait until you learn about the virus that requires 15 years of frozen sleep before it grants godlike power. The T. Veronica virus. T. Veronica was supposed to fix the T virus's intelligence problem by using ant queen DNA instead of leech genetics, and it worked perfectly, but only if you stay frozen in cryogenic sleep for 15 years first. Alexia Ashford created T. Veronica in 1981 at age 10 as a rival to the T virus. She was the artificial daughter of Edward Ashford, one of Umbrella's original founders. The formula combined progenitor virus with ant queen DNA and plant DNA. She removed the leech genetics that made T virus hosts mindless and brain dead. The ant queen DNA was supposed to create controlled bioweapons with hive mind command structures like ant colonies, intelligence plus obedience. The plant DNA provided enhanced cellular regeneration. On December 27, 1983, Alexia injected herself with T. Veronica and entered cryogenic suspension in the Antarctic facility. She remained frozen for exactly 15 years. When she emerged in 1998 during Code Veronica, she possessed fire manipulation abilities, complete consciousness, and queen-level command over other infected subjects. But then you check what happens to hosts who don't get 15 years of incubation. They lose everything instantly. Steve Burnside was infected with T. Veronica on December 28, 1998, by Alexia herself. He transformed within minutes. His body mutated into an axe-wielding monster with zero cognitive control. He attacked Claire Redfield on pure instinct. For exactly 47 seconds, his consciousness returned. He recognized Claire, spoke her name, and died fighting the mutation. Then the virus consumed him completely. The research files from the Antarctic facility explain the 15-year requirement. T. Veronica doesn't adapt to the host. The host must adapt to T. Veronica. The cryogenic period allows viral DNA to integrate cell by cell without triggering immune response. The process is so slow that the body accepts the foreign genetic code as its own. Without cryo-incubation, the immune system fights the virus fights back, and the host loses all higher brain function during the battle. Alexia infected herself at age 10 and spent ages 11 through 25 frozen in a tube. She consciously chose to sacrifice her entire childhood for power. The autopsy files note she physically aged during cryosleep despite suspended metabolism, suggesting the virus was actively rewriting her biology for 15 consecutive years. That's not a treatment period. That's a metamorphosis. T. Veronica proved you can create intelligent bioweapons that retain full consciousness and gain supernatural abilities. The trade-off is 15 years per subject, which makes mass production impossible. But if waiting 15 years for mutation seems impractical, wait until you learn about the virus the US government created using a 21-year-old woman's blood without her consent, the C virus. The C virus is a combination of G virus, T. Veronica, and T. abyss genetics, and that sounds like a terrorist nightmare, except it was deliberately created and funded by the United States government. Derek C. Simmons and the secretive organization called The Family developed the C virus around 2009 using classified government resources. The formula required G cells extracted directly from Sherry Birkin's bloodstream. Remember, she was infected with a G virus embryo in 1998 and retained active G cells for over a decade. They combined those regenerative properties with T. Veronica's intelligence retention and T. abyss adaptability for aquatic environments. The result was a virus designed for controlled bioterrorism with plausible deniability. It could be deployed as a gas, spread instantly through populations, and create intelligent infected soldiers called Javo who followed tactical orders. Major C virus outbreaks devastated Edonia in 2012 and Lanshan, China on June 29, 2013. Over 70,000 confirmed deaths in China alone. The virus wasn't stolen from a rogue corporation. It was authorized, funded, and weaponized by government officials. But then you check how the US government obtained those G cells from Sherry. She wasn't a volunteer, she was a prisoner. Sherry Birkin was placed under protective custody by the US government immediately after the Raccoon City incident in 1998. She was 12 years old. The custody lasted 11 years. During that time, government scientists regularly extracted blood samples to study her G virus antibodies. File Report 44209 from 2005 explicitly documents ongoing cellular harvesting for weapons development purposes. She wasn't being protected. She was being used as a biological resource. The C virus infection process is instant. Gaseous dispersal means zero incubation period. Subjects transform within 30 seconds of exposure. The infected become Javo, intelligent hosts who retain combat training, use firearms, and coordinate military-level tactics. When a Javo sustains critical damage, they enter a chrysalis state and emerge as complete bioweapons. The mutation type, depends on host genetics, creating dozens of variants from single exposure. Research notes from the family describe C virus deployment as strategically superior to nuclear options with reduced infrastructure damage. They saw civilian casualties as acceptable collateral in geopolitical conflicts. The virus was designed for deniability, release it in enemy territory, blame it on terrorists, and watch populations collapse. Sherry spent her childhood as a government test subject, so officials could build better biological weapons than Umbrella ever created. That's not protection. That's exploitation with paperwork. But if government-sanctioned bioweapons seem corrupt, wait until you learn about the fungal organism that stores 4 centuries of human consciousness in an underground network. The mold. The mold isn't a virus at all. It's a fungal superorganism with 400 years of stored human memories. And that's not speculation or fan theory. That's literally what Resident Evil Village research files state. The mold was discovered in Eastern Europe as a massive underground root system called the megamycete. The organism stores consciousness and memories of everything it infects over centuries. It creates molded creatures, grants regenerative abilities that border on immortality, and enables reality warping powers in compatible hosts. The Connections Bioweapon Organization engineered Eveline in the early 2010s using mold as her biological foundation. She was designed as a living weapon with psychic manipulation capabilities. Ethan Winters encountered the mold during the Baker family incident on October 10, 2017 in Dulvey, Louisiana. Jack Baker killed Ethan within 15 minutes of arrival. Ethan died. What happened next proves the mold doesn't just infect hosts, it replaces them entirely while maintaining perfect consciousness. But then you track Ethan's timeline after that initial death. He functioned normally for 3 years without realizing he was already dead. Ethan's body was reanimated by the mold after Jack Baker killed him. Every action he took from that point forward was a mold construct operating on his stored memories. He rescued Mia. He escaped Louisiana. He lived with his wife for 3 years. He had a daughter. Rose was born in 2020 to 2 mold-infected parents, making her biologically a fungal hybrid with human consciousness. Ethan didn't discover the truth until February 9th, 2021 in Castle Dimitrescu when the Duke told him directly. The megamycete root system stores 4 centuries of memories from entire villages in Eastern Europe. Miranda, the village priestess, accessed those memories and used them to resurrect her dead daughter. The resurrection failed, because memories aren't consciousness, but the attempt worked biologically. Files from Heisenberg's factory described the megamycete as organic data storage with consciousness preservation capabilities beyond current technological understanding. Eveline demonstrated abilities that break known science. She created realistic hallucinations that multiple people experienced simultaneously. She controlled minds across the entire Baker estate. She aged rapidly through conscious thought alone, going from apparent age 10 to apparent age 70 in under 3 years. Here's what the research notes won't say directly. If the mold can perfectly replicate human consciousness using stored memories, then Ethan Winters wasn't human for 3 years. He was a sentient fungus that believed it was Ethan. His daughter Rose is biologically the child of 2 fungal constructs. That means she's technically not human either. This crosses from bioweapon into existential horror. If consciousness can be copied and stored in fungal networks, what actually defines being alive? But if fungal consciousness seems impossible, wait until you learn about the original virus that started everything and why it shouldn't exist in nature. The progenitor virus. Every virus in Resident Evil traces back to progenitor, and we know it was discovered in Africa in the 1960s from rare flowers, except those flowers shouldn't exist in nature, and the ancient civilization that cultivated them understood viral genetics before modern science existed. Oswell Spencer, James Marcus, and Edward Ashford discovered the progenitor virus in the Ndapaya ruins of West Africa during an expedition in 1966. The virus came from flowers called the Stairway of the Sun that grew exclusively in one specific cave system. Edward Ashford wanted to use it to heal disabilities and regenerate damaged tissue. James Marcus saw potential for forced evolution research. Oswell Spencer wanted biological weapons and immortality. They founded Umbrella Corporation in 1968 to weaponize their discovery. Progenitor became the genetic foundation for every subsequent virus. the T virus, G virus, T Veronica, Ouroboros, and every outbreak across 30 years of Resident Evil history. The flowers contain mutagenic properties that either enhance human DNA into superhuman capabilities or destroy it completely. There's no middle ground, but then you examine the Endopia ruins themselves. The murals depict genetic manipulation techniques that didn't exist until the 21st century. The Endopia people weren't just growing flowers, they were cultivating them deliberately. Ancient stone carvings show detailed biological processes, cell division, genetic integration, viral replication cycles. Spencer's expedition notes from 1966 describe the murals as impossibly advanced for a pre-industrial civilization. The Endopia had been using progenitor in rituals for centuries before Spencer arrived. They understood what the flowers did. They knew the flowers caused mutations. They built an entire culture around controlled viral enhancement. Files recovered from Tricell facilities in 2009 reveal something worse. Analysis of the stairway of the sunflowers shows genetic markers that don't match any naturally occurring plant species on Earth. The flower's DNA contains sequences that appear artificially designed. Laboratory reports explicitly state genetic structure suggests engineered origin rather than natural evolution. Spencer believed progenitor could grant godhood. He spent 40 years trying to achieve it. He created dozens of viruses. He killed millions of people. He never succeeded. But the Endopia ruins suggest someone did succeed thousands of years ago. Here's what the research files imply but never confirm directly. If progenitor was engineered by an ancient civilization, then every virus, every outbreak, every death in Resident Evil traces back to a prehistoric bioweapon. That means humanity has been playing with something we didn't create and don't understand. The T-virus killed Raccoon City. The G-virus destroyed William Birkin. Las Plagas created hive mind armies. Ouroboros almost exterminated humanity. Every single catastrophe started because 3 men found flowers in a cave that shouldn't exist. But these aren't isolated incidents. Every single one of these viruses shares something deeper, something that changes everything we thought we knew about bioweapons and the true purpose behind Umbrella Corporation. Resident Evil's bioweapons aren't just zombie viruses. They're documented proof of what happens when human ambition has zero ethical limits. From parasites that keep you conscious inside a hijacked body, to a weaponized child who killed over 100 people just wanting a family, to something ancient that traps your consciousness forever after death. Today we're ranking the most disturbing virus lore in Resident Evil history. The last one will change how you think about dying. Las Plagas. Las Plagas technically isn't a virus, it's a parasitic arthropod, and normally that would make it less disturbing. It doesn't. Discovered dormant in the caves beneath a Spanish castle, Las Plagas has been used to control human populations since at least 1741, when a pagan cult called Los Iluminados enslaved the surrounding region with it. Centuries later, miners broke into those sealed caves and inhaled dormant spores. They didn't notice anything for weeks. By the time the cult leader Osmond Sadler understood what was happening, he had an army. The parasite enters through the jugular, or through inhaled spores, migrates to the spinal cord, and latches directly onto the nervous system. And here's what makes this uniquely terrifying compared to everything else on this list. T-virus zombies are brain dead. Zero awareness, zero cognition, just hunger. But Ganados, the infected in RE4, can talk, coordinate ambushes, wield chainsaws, and follow complex tactical orders. Luis Serra's own research notes compared Las Plagas to Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, the real-world zombie fungus that hijacks ants while keeping them technically alive. The implication is obvious and awful. You might be watching everything happen, completely unable to stop it, trapped behind your own eyes while someone else uses your hands. But wait, it gets worse when the host starts dying. When a Ganado sustains fatal injuries, the mature Plaga erupts from the neck or skull and fights for survival independently, all blades and thrashing tendrils. And in cases of multiple parasites, you get regeneradores, pale, emaciated nightmares that regrow severed limbs in real time and can only be killed by thermally scanning for every internal parasite hiding inside the body. One escaped containment during testing at Sadler's facility. It took 20 hours to recontain. It killed 7 researchers in the process. Sadler's actual endgame was to infect Ashley Graham, the US president's daughter, and send her home untreated. He would have had remote control of the American government through one infected girl's nervous system. But Las Plagas controls you in ways you can still recognize. It leaves something human at the wheel. The next entry doesn't even leave you that. T. Veronica. Alexia Ashford created this virus at age 10. Let that sit for a second. She was a child, a designer baby. cloned from her family's 19th century matriarch and engineered with artificially boosted intelligence genes. She graduated university at 10 and became Umbrella's youngest ever chief researcher. William Birkin, one of the most brilliant bioweapon scientists in the series, reportedly intensified his own G-Virus research out of pure jealous rivalry with a literal child. T. Veronica was built by combining progenitor with ancient retroviral DNA, extracted from queen ant genomes and plant genetics. The ant component was deliberate. Alexia didn't want to create a weapon. She wanted to create a queen. The first test subject was her own father. When 12-year-old Alexia learned she and her twin Alfred were clones, she coldly captured Alexander Ashford and injected him with T. Veronica. The virus worked too fast. It destroyed his brain and mutated his body into something called Nosferatu. His heart burst through his chest wall. Combat tentacles grew from his torso. He was bound, gagged, and imprisoned in the Antarctic facility for years. Workers in that building reported hearing his screams regularly. Alexander had actually anticipated this might happen and secretly built a contingency weapon against her, leaving it hidden with a recorded message for anyone who found it. Alexia then injected herself and entered cryostasis at age 12, faking her own death. She knew the virus needed time to properly bond with a living host. She calculated 15 years. She woke up at 27 with the ability to control insects through pheromone hive mind, produce combustible blood she could weaponize, and transform her body into a massive dragonfly organism. She regarded all of humanity as ants and planned to reshape Earth into her colony. But here's the detail nobody talks about. A South American drug lord named Javier Hidalgo purchased T. Veronica from Wesker to treat his daughter Manuela's degenerative disease. Without Alexia's cryogenic technology, his alternative was regularly transplanting fresh organs to keep Manuela's body accepting the virus. His cartel kidnapped over 50 teenage girls from a nearby village and harvested their organs over several years. Manuela had zero idea where her treatments were coming from. T. Veronica didn't just create a monster, it created a pipeline for one. And if you think a virus with a 15-year activation window is slow-moving, the next entry killed a city in 3 days. T-Virus. Over 100,000 people died in Raccoon City in 72 hours. The T-Virus was created in 1978 by James Marcus, who spliced progenitor with leech DNA. William Birkin refined it later using Ebola traits and accidentally inherited Ebola's photosensitivity in the process. That mutation became pyrosensitivity, every BOW in the franchise being vulnerable to fire traces back to that one accident in a lab in 1978. The zombification process is clinical, and it is ugly. The virus inserts genetic code via reverse transcription, hijacks cells to produce copies of itself, and burns through the host's cellular energy doing it. Early symptoms are indistinguishable from flu. Fatigue, fever spiking to 106 degrees Fahrenheit, itching. The outer skin layers erode and shed. Higher cognitive function shuts down systematically until only the brainstem is active. The host enters a coma, then it gets back up. There's a journal entry in RE1, written by one of the Spencer Estate's kennel keepers as the infection progressed. Short entries getting shorter, more disoriented, more desperate. It ends with 2 words: itchy, tasty. Umbrella knew roughly 10% of any population would be naturally immune to the T-virus, so they created hunters specifically to hunt down survivors. They designed a predator to clean up their own failure rate. But the darkest thing the T-virus ever produced wasn't in Raccoon City. It was Lisa Trevor. In 1967, Spencer's men abducted 14-year-old Lisa and her mother Jessica and injected them with experimental progenitor strains. Jessica died. Lisa survived but deteriorated mentally, desperately searching for her mother. Umbrella sent female staff members disguised as Jessica to observe her reactions. Lisa always saw through it. She ripped their faces off, believing they had stolen her mother's face, and wore the stitched results as a mask. For over 20 years, she was injected with every conceivable virus strain Umbrella developed. Researchers documented her in clinical reports and called her bastard in the margins. When they tried to execute her, she survived, was declared dead for 3 days, and kept wandering the tunnels. She finally found her mother's skeleton in a coffin, clutched the skull, said mother, and threw herself into an abyss. RE1 director Shinji Mikami said he designed Lisa specifically to make players feel sympathy and guilt. The T-virus created a zombie apocalypse, but the G-virus created something that hunted its own daughter, G-virus. The G-virus wasn't engineered. It was discovered inside Lisa Trevor's body. After 20 years of being injected with every pathogen Umbrella could produce, Lisa's immune system had absorbed and recombined them all into something completely new. When researchers injected the NE alpha parasite, and it simply vanished, Birkin investigated and found a virus that had never never existed before, born entirely from one abused woman's desperate biology. He named it Golgotha, after the biblical site of the crucifixion. The antidote he developed alongside it he named Devil. The religious symbolism was deliberate. Birkin spent a decade refining it in Umbrella's underground nest lab beneath Raccoon City, becoming increasingly paranoid and obsessive. The RE2 remake revealed he was running experiments on children from a nearby orphanage during the final research stages. When Umbrella sent agents to seize his work in September 1998, Birkin was shot and injected himself with the G-Virus rather than let them have it. Here's where it separates from every other virus on this list. G-mutants never stop mutating. Wounds don't weaken them, they accelerate the process. Birkin's 5 transformation stages go from a recognizable, one-armed human with a shoulder-mounted eyeball, to a 4-armed predator, to a hulking creature losing all human features, to something that tears the roof off a train car to fit inside it, to a formless mass of flesh and spikes, with partially absorbed, recognizably human, corpses fused into its body, people he consumed, still visible, still shaped like people. But the G-Virus carries a biological imperative unique in the franchise. G-organisms are driven to reproduce. They implant embryos down victims' throats via tentacles. If the host is a blood relative, the embryo merges with them and produces a stable second-generation organism. If the host is genetically incompatible, which is nearly everyone, the embryo consumes their internal organs from the inside and bursts through their chest. This is why Birkin spent the entire game hunting his own daughter Sherry across Raccoon City. She was the only genetically compatible host in the city. His virus needed her. But in the RE2 remake, the G2 creature hesitated when it found his wife Annette, only attacked when she drew a gun. And in its final moments, the creature screamed Sherry's name, a father's love, still there, fighting against a body that had already stopped being his. The G-Virus turned a man into a monster. What comes next turned an entire family into monsters, and made sure they remembered every second of it. Virus. 12,234 people were dissolved to clone one woman. The C-Virus was created by Dr. Carla Radames, who had completed a doctorate in genetics by age 15. She was recruited into a shadow organization called The Family by National Security Advisor Derek Simmons, and spent years developing a new strain by combining T. veronica with G-Virus antibodies extracted from Sherry Birkin's blood. The T. veronica component preserved cognitive function. The G-Virus component enabled mutations that made everything before it look restrained. Carla led the entire project. She was also desperately in love with Simmons, which he exploited completely. For years, the program abducted human test subjects, searching for a genome that could be rebuilt into a genetic copy of Ada Wong, a woman Simmons was obsessively fixated on. Every subject produced only monstrosities, 12,234 of them. When a researcher finally identified that Carla's own genome closely matched Ada's, Simmons had the answer he needed. He had his most devoted scientist restrained, injected with the C-Virus, and left to dissolve inside a chrysalid cocoon. The event was recorded on a VHS tape labeled "Happy Birthday, Ada Wong." She emerged as a perfect physical copy of Ada. Simmons spent months conditioning her with false memories, but fragments of the original Carla kept surfacing. An internal document recovered later captured her inner voice. Someone crying in her head, saying, "Don't forgive him, kill him, crush everything he built." When full awareness returned, she founded Neo Umbrella and spent the rest of her life trying to burn his world down. She succeeded at considerable scale. The C-Virus itself is the most versatile mutation engine in the franchise. Direct injection creates Javo, intelligent soldiers with 15 documented localized mutation types. Destroy an arm, it becomes an insect claw. Blow off a leg, it sprouts a moth wing. Sever the head entirely, it regrows as a compound insect eye. Sustained damage can trigger a chrysalid state where the body completely liquefies inside a cocoon and reconstitutes as an entirely new creature. Airborne gas exposure creates zombies that can also cocoon mid-fight. Simmons himself, repeatedly injected during the final confrontation, cycled through human, canine, centaur, T-Rex, and giant fly mutations. When he finally died, his pooling blood formed the shape of the Umbrella Corporation logo on the ground. The Tall Oaks attack alone zombified approximately 70,000 people in a single strike. The US president was among the infected. Leon Kennedy shot him personally, but the true scale of Carla's plan was HAOS, a colossal BOW gestating in an underwater facility designed to spread C-Virus gas globally through asexual reproduction. It hatched at only 70.3% development. It nearly killed the entire team sent to stop it. At full development, every human on Earth gets infected. That's the C virus at scale. But the next entry didn't need a delivery system. It was designed to kill everyone on the planet who wasn't already a god. Ouroboros. Albert Wesker's plan was to load this virus into missiles, launch them to the tropopause, and let global wind currents do the rest. Every human on Earth infected simultaneously. Ouroboros was built directly from progenitor flowers harvested in West Africa and named after the ancient symbol of a serpent devouring its own tail, representing death and rebirth as a single event. The original prototype killed 100% of test subjects, 0 exceptions. The breakthrough came not from any laboratory refinement, but from a person Wesker was keeping alive specifically to exploit. After the Spencer Estate incident in 2006, Wesker captured the unconscious Jill Valentine and discovered something extraordinary. A mutant T virus strain had been lying dormant in her body for 8 years, since Raccoon City, and during her coma, her immune system had fought it to a standstill, producing extraordinarily powerful antibodies. Wesker kept her alive as a living factory. He administered T-virus doses repeatedly to stimulate antibody production, harvested what her body generated, and used it to stabilize Ouroboros. The side effects of prolonged exposure turned her hair blonde and her skin pale. He then controlled her using a progenitor-derived chemical called P30, delivered through a device mounted to her chest, and forced her to fight against Chris Redfield. Jill Valentine saved the world from Ouroboros, and spent 3 years conscious inside a body she couldn't control while it happened. For hosts that reject Ouroboros, which is nearly everyone, black leech-like tentacles erupt through the skin and consume the host from the inside out. The creature then absorbs any nearby organic matter, growing with every corpse and animal and piece of vegetation it touches. Excelligione, Wesker's tricell partner, was infected the moment she outlived her usefulness. Her body absorbed a pile of Magini corpses on a tanker deck and expanded into a roughly 70-foot mass of writhing black tentacles. The only vulnerability is orange glowing cores buried deep inside the mass, accessible only through fire. Here's what nobody talks about. No unmodified human has ever successfully adapted to Ouroboros. Every supposed survivor, including Wesker himself, was already a prior viral mutant before injection. His plan to gift the worthy with godhood was built on a foundation that had never once worked. A global release would have produced 0 gods and 0 survivors. His own file reads, "Tonight, Ouroboros and I shall awaken the best of this world. It is then that humanity will receive its final judgment." Chris and Sheva crashed his bomber into a volcano and killed him with rocket launchers as he sank into the lava. But even Ouroboros has a ceiling. It kills. What comes last doesn't kill you, it keeps you. The Megamycete. Nobody created this one. Every other entry on this list traces back to a person with a syringe and an agenda. The Megamycete predates all of them. It is an ancient fungal superorganism of unknowable age, growing beneath a megalithic burial site in the mountains of Eastern Europe, and for millennia it did one thing. It consumed the bodies of the dead buried above it. Not just their DNA, their consciousnesses. Every mind it ever touched is stored inside it, aware, interacting with other stored minds in a state that is neither life nor death. It is a living database of everyone who has ever died near it. In 1919, a woman named Miranda lost her daughter Eva to the Spanish flu. Planning to end her own life, she stumbled into the Megamycete's cave and touched it. It flooded her with thousands of stored minds, including Eva's. It granted her near immortality, the ability to shapeshift into a murder of crows, and regeneration that made Ouroboros look fragile. She spent the next century posing as a religious prophet, using the surrounding villages as an endless experimental population, searching for a human vessel that could receive Eva's stored consciousness and bring her daughter back. 100 years. Hundreds of villagers, all of it for a child she lost in 1919. The 4 lords, the regional monsters of R.E. Village, are all Kudu experiments, parasites Miranda derived from mold-infected nematodes. Lady Dimitrescu, 9.5 feet tall, whose hereditary blood disease was amplified into a constant need for human blood, she processed into wine called Sanguis Virginis, blood of the virgin, sold commercially throughout the region. Her daughters were bodies composed entirely of insect swarms held together by Kadu, dissolving in cold air. Karl Heisenberg, who secretly built an army of cyborg corpses fused with mechanical parts, planning a rebellion Miranda never suspected. Donna Beneviento, whose hallucinogenic influence was powerful enough to generate RE8's most terrifying sequence without a single enemy. Just dread. just a basement, just something crawling that should not exist. Salvatore Moreau warped into a grotesque aquatic creature, conducting failed experiments while desperately seeking approval from a woman who regarded him as a disappointment. All of them products of one organism that was never designed, never engineered, never contained. When Ethan detonated the explosives at the Megamycete's core, vast tendrils erupted from the ground and swallowed the entire village whole. Ethan, who was already a mold creature and couldn't survive the cure, triggered the blast himself. His body was destroyed. But in the shadows of Rose DLC, set 16 years later, Rose enters a surviving fragment of the Megamycete. Inside it, she finds her father, his consciousness still there, still aware, manifesting a shotgun to protect her one last time. The Megamycete doesn't just kill, it collects. And what it collects, it keeps forever. Every other virus on this list ends when the host dies. This one is just getting started. Resident Evil Zombie is the most disrespected enemy in gaming history. Everyone treats them like target practice, like walking punching bags that exist just to waste your ammo. But the actual numbers tell a completely different story. Today I'm breaking down the deadliest enemies in the entire Resident Evil franchise, from the ones you laugh at to the ones that are literally unkillable, starting with the enemy you've been underestimating your entire life: zombies. Here's a fun experiment. Ask any Resident Evil 2 player how many handgun shots it takes to kill a zombie. Most people will say 4, maybe 5. The real answer? Around 10, and I can prove it. The average zombie in Resident Evil 2 has roughly 840 hit points. A standard handgun body shot deals about 80 damage. That means you're burning through 10 rounds on a single zombie in a hallway. Headshots bump that up to around 100 damage, which still means 8 or 9 clean hits. Miss the head and clip a leg. That's only 50 damage per shot. Suddenly one zombie is eating half your ammo reserve, and you haven't even reached the next save room. Try the knife? Knife pokes deal a pathetic 20 to 30 damage against an enemy with up to 840 HP. That's not a strategy, that's a death wish. But here's where it gets weird. 3 specific zombies in Leon's prison scenario have exactly 1 hit point. 1 hit and they're done. Nobody knows why. These 3 enemies break every rule the game establishes about zombie durability, and the community has been arguing about it for years. Are they intentional? A developer oversight? Some kind of mercy mechanic for an already brutal section? Nobody has a definitive answer, which means the enemy you thought you understood completely still has secrets buried in its code. But zombies are a warm-up compared to what's next, because the licker doesn't even need eyes to ruin your entire run. Licker. Most players see a licker for the first time and immediately think the same thing. It's blind, so I'm safe. That instinct will get you killed faster than almost anything else in Resident Evil. Here's the thing. Lickers have 0 eyes. None. Their entire visual system is gone, but what replaced it is so much worse. That exposed enlarged brain isn't just grotesque decoration. It's a hypersensitive auditory processing organ that turns every single sound you make into a targeting beacon. Every footstep, every reload, every door you open, every healing animation you trigger in a panic. The licker hears all of it, and it reacts faster than most sighted enemies in the entire series, and the way they attack is genuinely nightmarish. Their muscle structure is completely externally reorganized, meaning they can lunge from distances that make no physical sense for a grounded enemy. They crawl walls, they drop from ceilings, they close gaps from angles your brain isn't wired to expect, because normal enemies simply can't produce those movement patterns. But here's where it gets really unsettling. The evolved licker in the PS1 version of Resident Evil 2 only has 40 HP. That's paper thin. A couple of clean shotgun blasts and it's done. So the danger was never about durability. It was never about tanking hits. The entire threat is encounter design and your own panic. Lickers punish your habits. Running, shooting, healing. Literally everything a competent player does instinctively becomes a death sentence. Your skill is the weapon they use against you, and that's a level of design most enemies in the series never reach. But at least a licker needs to hear you. The next enemy on this list doesn't need any of your senses to find you, because it's already inside the host. NE-beta parasite. Most parasites need a host to matter. NE-beta doesn't, and that's what makes it terrifying. Here's the thing. NE-beta doesn't infect healthy humans. It doesn't need to. It specifically targets hosts already infected by the T-virus, latching onto mutated tissue and feeding on it. So that zombie stumbling towards you, that licker crawling across the ceiling, they're not just threats on their own anymore. They're potential potential vessels. And once any beta gets inside, everything changes. The parasite overrides the host's behavior completely. Whatever instincts or patterns that enemy had before, gone, replaced with controlled, directed aggression and boosted physical combat ability. A standard infected enemy becomes a weapon, not a mindless one, a controlled one. But here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. Any beta doesn't just sit around waiting for a host to wander by. It can survive and move independently outside of a body for a considerable amount of time. This isn't some fragile organism that dies in open air. It's a functional predator between hosts, actively hostile toward humans, hunting for its next vessel while being perfectly capable of threatening you on its own. And the worst part, the tool you'd naturally reach for doesn't work. Antiviral spray. The item literally designed to counter viral mutants in Operation Raccoon City does absolutely nothing to NE Beta S. You brought the right weapon for every other infected creature in the game, and against this thing, it's useless. Wrong tool for the job, no fallback plan. So you're dealing with a parasite that makes existing threats smarter and deadlier, survives on its own as an autonomous predator, and shrugs off the one countermeasure you'd bet your life on. It's not just dangerous, it's a force multiplier with no off switch. And yet, any beta is still just a footnote compared to the thing Umbrella built to carry its bigger, nastier cousin, T-103 Tyrant. Most bioweapons in Resident Evil are accidents, failed experiments, one-off horrors that crawled out of a lab nobody was watching. The T-103 is none of those things. It was designed from the ground up to be manufactured. Not one monster, a product line. And that distinction changes everything. See, a single Tyrant is a boss fight. You encounter it, you survive it, you move on. But the T-103 was built for mass production. Umbrella wasn't creating a weapon. They were creating inventory. Individual units were assigned series identifiers and shipped to specific locations like military hardware. T-078, for example, was cataloged and delivered directly to Rockford Island. Not unleashed, not escaped. Shipped with a tracking number. Now let's talk about what arrives when that shipment shows up. The T-103's body and coat are described as nearly bulletproof. Conventional firearms do almost nothing to the torso, limbs, or midsection. The only consistently documented weak spot is the exposed head. That's it. One target on a walking tank that never stops moving toward you. You're not fighting this thing. You're trying to land precision headshots on something that shrugs off everything else. But here's where it gets worse. Development files classify the T-103 with accelerated metabolism and exemplary regenerative capability. That means whatever damage you do manage to land is being actively undone in real time. You shoot it, it heals. You shoot it again, it heals again. The damage window is constantly closing. Strategy documentation for dealing with a T-103 literally advises running while shooting the head, not standing your ground. Not finding cover, running, and hoping your aim holds long enough to matter. That's the official best case scenario against one unit. Umbrella had dozens cataloged and ready to deploy. Cold serial numbers on shipping manifests, each one representing a regenerating, bulletproof nightmare that you can barely slow down, let alone stop. But if the T-103 is terrifying as a product, wait until you meet the version that was given a mission, a target, and zero intention of ever stopping. Mr. X, most enemies in Resident Evil give you a chance. They have a room, a patrol, a territory. You walk in, you deal with them, you move on. Mr. X doesn't work like that. The T-00 Tyrant has one objective: find you and kill you. No idle state, no patrol route, no territory, just relentless, unending forward pursuit until one of you is dead. And here's the thing. You can't really fight him, not in any meaningful way. His entire body is nearly bulletproof, and the only documented weak point is his exposed head. Sounds manageable, right? Except every single second you spend lining up a headshot is a second he's closing the distance. And when he reaches you, his punches deal massive damage. We're talking hits that can end a healthy run in 2 or 3 connections. But that's not even the worst part. Mr. X has a rising uppercut that is a confirmed one-hit kill. Not a you'll survive with a sliver of health hit. A kill. One mistimed dodge in a narrow hallway, one bad camera angle, one moment of hesitation, and your run is over. Instantly. In Leon's scenario, this is your reality for most of the campaign. There is no weapon capable of stopping him until near the very end. The entire middle stretch of the game is a sustained survival exercise where every decision you make, every door you open, every resource you spend happens under the constant pressure of knowing he is walking towards you right now. That's the real genius of Mr. X. He's not a boss fight. He's an atmosphere. He turns locked doors into death traps. He turns backtracking into gambling. He turns silence into dread because you know the footsteps are coming. But if Mr. X feels like an unstoppable nightmare, wait until you meet the thing Umbrella built specifically to be smarter than him. Nemesis T-Type. Nemesis isn't just a bigger tyrant, it's a tyrant with 2 brains. Let me explain. Every tyrant you've seen so far, the T-103, Mr. X, all of them, they're running on a single neural system. Powerful, sure, but limited. Nemesis is different because Umbrella implanted something called the NE-alpha parasite directly into a tyrant host, and that parasite formed its own separate supplementary brain. 2 cognitive systems running in parallel inside one body. One belongs to the tyrant, the other belongs to the thing feeding on it, and that second brain is everything. It's what processes tactical information independently, what elevates Nemesis beyond the lumbering pursuit behavior of a standard Mr. X. Where Mr. X walks toward you with brute determination, Nemesis calculates. It adapts. It uses weapons. It makes decisions that no base tyrant model is capable of making, because it literally has a second mind doing the thinking. But here's where it gets worse. The NE-alpha parasite doesn't just sit there. It's hyperactive. It grows exponentially by feeding on the host's own tissue, which means the longer Nemesis exists, the more developed and dominant that parasite brain becomes. It doesn't just chase you, it improves while it chases you. Every encounter you survive, the thing hunting you is getting smarter, and you can actually see this happening. In Nemesis's later mutation stages, the parasite's adult form becomes visually apparent, resembling a massive, enlarged human brain bulging through the host's body. That's not random mutation. That's the parasite winning. This wasn't an accident either. The Sales Office FX in Resident Evil 3 identifies a specific chemical, VTJ98, used to incubate the NET type. That level of detail means Umbrella had a full cultivation protocol, a recipe. They knew exactly what they were building. But even Nemesis, with its dual brain system and escalating intelligence, looks simple compared to what the G-Virus did to William Birkin. William Birkin. William Birkin didn't become G because Umbrella wanted him to. He became G because Umbrella wanted him dead. When the USS team gunned him down and left him bleeding out in his own lab, Birkin did the only thing a desperate, dying man, surrounded by his life's work, could do. He injected himself with the G-Virus. Not in a controlled environment, not with safety protocols, not with any plan for what came next. Just a needle, a prototype virus, and the raw biological will to not die. And here's what makes the early stage of G one of the most disturbing things in the entire franchise. In G1 form, Birkin wasn't gone. He remembered. He retained his intelligence, his memories, his identity. He pursued the Umbrella soldiers who shot him using a metal pipe as a weapon. Not claws, not tendrils. A pipe, like a man getting revenge, not a monster hunting prey. And in certain moments, he called out his daughter Sherry's name. Let that sink in. A mutating, half-human creature still cognizant enough to recognize his own child. Still father enough to say her name. That's not a boss fight. That's a tragedy. But G doesn't stay tragic for long. G undergoes 5 documented stages, and each one strips away more of the man underneath. G-cells don't just mutate, they continuously corrupt the host's flesh between encounters. So G3 isn't a weaker version of G1 that took more damage. It's a categorically different organism. The intelligence disappears, the memories dissolve, what replaces them is raw, overwhelming biological mass that exists only to grow and consume. And the weak points reflect this descent into pure body horror. In certain forms, the critical vulnerability is a cluster of eye growths hidden inside a lamprey eel mouth. The game literally makes you aim into the most visually grotesque part of the creature to deal real damage. The design punishes hesitation. Birkin wanted to survive. The G-Virus made sure he'd never stop surviving. It just forgot to keep him human. But if G is what happens when one man loses control of his own creation, wait until you see what happens when someone engineers a virus specifically designed to reshape the entire human species. Ouroboros. Most viruses in Resident Evil don't come with a dosage chart. Ouroboros does. 1 bottle for subjects at or above 60 kilograms. 2/3 of a bottle for 40 to 60. Half a bottle for 20 to 40. 1/3 for anything under 20 kilograms. That's children. They wrote dosage instructions for children. And the clinical precision of that chart, sitting right next to what Ouroboros actually does to a human body, is one of the most quietly disturbing things in the entire franchise. Albert Wesker developed Ouroboros with one goal, a stable, immortal, superhuman state. He named it after the Ouroboros symbol, the snake eating its own tail, which tells you everything you need to know about Wesker's self-awareness. Zero irony filters on that man. But here's the thing. When Ouroboros works, it genuinely works. A successful adaptation doesn't just buff the host, it rewrites them. The subject stops aging entirely. They no longer need any stabilizing serum. Speed, strength, and regeneration all get pushed to near supernatural levels. This isn't a mutation like the G-Virus where you're slowly losing yourself across 5 stages of body horror. Ouroboros is a complete biological overhaul. You go inhuman. You come out something else entirely, but you come out functional. And it doesn't stop at the host's own body. Ouroboros can fuse with external organic material, stitched limbs, foreign tissue, even metallic components get integrated into a functioning biological mechanical system. The virus doesn't care where the material came from. If it's there, it gets absorbed and repurposed. Now here's where it gets genuinely terrifying. That's what happens when adaptation succeeds. When it fails, the subject doesn't just die. Ouroboros redirects outward and begins assimilating every piece of organic matter in the surrounding environment. A failed test subject becomes a growing, consuming mass that spreads across the room, the building, whatever it can reach. The subject becomes the room. If containment fails, there is no ceiling on how large the thing can get. That's exactly why the protocols exist. If Ouroboros successfully adapts to a subject's DNA, documentation mandates urgent reporting and immediate containment procedures. Not observation, not study, containment. Because even the people who made this thing understood that a successful result might be more dangerous than a failed one. But Ouroboros was always a means to an end, and the man who created it was already something far worse than anything the virus could produce. Albert Wesker. Albert Wesker is the most dangerous kind of enemy in Resident Evil. Not because of what he can do, but because of the gap between what he thinks he is and what he actually is. Let me explain. Wesker's biological enhancement program ran on 2 separate tracks. The first was the T. Wesker prototype virus, a strain Birkin discovered and personally handed to Wesker. This thing could fully revive dead tissue and restore organisms without causing zombification. No rotting flesh, no mindless hunger, no degradation. Just a clean biological resurrection. That alone puts it in a category almost nothing else in Resident Evil occupies. The second track was Ouroboros, which Wesker engineered to push those enhancements even further toward genuine immortality. Stop aging, eliminate physiological instability, become something permanently beyond human limitation. Here's the thing. The T. Wesker strain gave him real, measurable upgrades. Enhanced metabolism, increased durability, regenerative capacity that could pull him back from injuries that would kill any normal person. But Birkin's own research notes flagged it as a prototype. Not a finished product, a prototype, meaning Wesker was essentially running his own body as an ongoing experiment with no confirmed, stable endpoint. Every day he existed in that enhanced state was another day of testing whether the whole system would hold together. And by 2006, it was already showing cracks, visible aging, wrinkles, physical wear. The man who projected himself as an immortal god was getting older, slower. Whatever the T. Wesker virus had given him, it wasn't true immortality. It was a significantly delayed version of it. The clock was still ticking, just quieter. But here's where it gets really interesting. Wesker retains full sensory experience, including pain. He can be stunned. He can be temporarily incapacitated by sufficient bodily damage. His regeneration is real, but it costs energy. And in at least one documented case, that energy ran out completely, causing a temporary death state. The machine shut off because it ran out of fuel. That's the real Albert Wesker, a man who understood the science well enough to build one of the most dangerous biological threat profiles in the entire franchise, but couldn't fully solve the problem for himself. He projected invincibility. The biology delivered something less, still extraordinary, still terrifying, but mortal. And yet, compared to what's coming next, even Wesker's enhancements look modest, because the final entry on this list doesn't just resist death, it makes death almost mechanically impossible. Super Tyrant. Every single enemy on this list was built, engineered, designed in a lab with a specific purpose. The Super Tyrant is different. The Super Tyrant is what happens when the design fails. See, standard tyrants have a power limiter built into their biology. It's basically a biological leash that keeps the mutation in check, keeps the weapon controllable, keeps it useful. The Super Tyrant is the moment that leash snaps. The body mutates beyond its own engineered constraints, skeletal growth rips through the arms, forming crude claws, the upper body mass explodes outward, and what you're left with isn't a weapon anymore. It's a catastrophe with a heartbeat, and the game knows it. The Super Tyrant is documented with 1 billion hit points. Not a million, not 10 million, 1 billion. That number is so absurd, it doesn't even function like a game stat. It reads like a developer writing, "You are not supposed to kill this thing in the only language the engine understands." Now, to be fair, that billion HP figure comes from community-extracted data and modding datasets rather than an official Capcom stat sheet, and there's real fan skepticism about the exact precision of those numbers. But here's the thing, it almost doesn't matter what the exact number is, because the encounter design tells the same story from every angle. The upper body carries a 60% damage reduction, the head carries 50% reduction, and the lower half? Completely invulnerable. 0 damage, period. So the tiny fraction of the body you can actually hurt is also the part that absorbs more than half of everything you throw at it. But here's where it gets genuinely cruel. There's a hidden fight timer governing the encounter, starting at roughly 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Every time you stagger the Super Tyrant, that timer accelerates by 50%. Up to 3 times. Let me say that again. The game punishes you for fighting back, doing well, landing shots, actually hurting this thing. It makes the situation more dangerous. The countdown speeds up because you dared to resist, and the timer has a hard floor. The minimum threshold before the game hands you a rocket launcher sits at around 1 minute and 30 seconds. You literally cannot outshoot this encounter. The game has a built-in mechanical guarantee that you will eventually receive the one tool that actually works, because no combination of weapons in your inventory was ever going to get the job done. That's what makes the Super Tyrant the deadliest enemy in Resident Evil. Not just the billion HP, not just the damage reduction, not just the invulnerable lower body. It's the philosophy behind the encounter. Every other enemy on this list was designed to be defeated. Some are harder than others. Some require strategy, resource management, or specific weak points, but they were all built with the assumption that a skilled player could win. The Super Tyrant was built to be survived, not beaten, not outsmarted. Survived. The encounter literally will not let you win on your own terms. It waits until you've endured enough, then gives you the answer. Everything before that moment is just the game proving a point. You were never in control. Resident Evil has turned scientists, soldiers, and innocent people into some of the most horrifying creatures in gaming history. But the transformations aren't just gross for the sake of it. The best ones are tragic, watching someone lose everything that makes them human, one mutation at a time. So today, we're breaking down the most disturbing transformations in the entire franchise, starting with the one that kicked off Raccoon City's worst night, William Birkin. William Birkin spent his entire career building a weapon that would eventually destroy him. And honestly, that's kind of poetic in the worst possible way. Before he became a walking tumor with anger issues, Birkin was one of Umbrella's most brilliant virologists. He was a key mind behind the T-virus, and later, he discovered something even worse, the G-virus, a strain so dangerous that Umbrella itself wanted to take it from him by force. He'd isolated it from Lisa Trevor, a woman experimented on for over 20 years, whose body had absorbed so many progenitor strains it became a living archive of everything Umbrella had ever created. Birkin looked at that and thought, I can work with this, which is, not ideal. By September 1998, Umbrella sent the USS to raid his lab beneath Raccoon City and seize the samples. They shot him multiple times and left him bleeding out on the floor, but dying men make desperate choices. Birkin grabbed a syringe of raw, unstabilized G-virus and jammed it into his own body. Not a prepared dose, a lab sample injected as a last act of defiance, and that single detail is what turns his story from a bad day into a 5-stage nightmare. G1 still looks vaguely like a person if you squint hard enough and ignore the massive eyeball growing out of his shoulder. He's still wearing his lab coat. Something about that detail makes it worse. But the G-virus doesn't stop. Every time Birkin takes enough damage, instead of dying like a reasonable organism, the virus triggers another evolution. G2 adds claws and exposed muscle. G3 sprouts multiple limbs and secondary jaws. G4 fossilizes his extra arms and fuses them into his torso, like the virus tried to design, got bored, and moved on. And then there's G5. G5 isn't a creature. It's a biological event, a pulsating mass of flesh and eyes that fills an entire train car. No silhouette, no lab coat, no face, just a throbbing wall of tissue that used to be a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. Through every mutation, Birkin keeps hunting for his daughter, Sherry, 12 years old, wandering the sewers while her father lurches through walls trying to find her. The G-virus has a built-in reproductive drive, a compulsion to implant embryos into genetically compatible hosts, and his own daughter is the most compatible host available. So what you're watching across Resident Evil 2 isn't just a monster getting bigger, It's a father's love being hijacked by a virus and twisted into something predatory. He's not protecting Sherry, he's trying to infect her. The scientist who spent decades perfecting viral manipulation became raw material for his own experiment. Every form he takes is a reminder that the G virus doesn't care about your genius. It just builds. But if Birkin's story is about a man destroyed by his own ambition, the next one is about something far worse. A child who never got a choice at all. Lisa Trevor. Lisa Trevor is the single most tragic character in the entire Resident Evil franchise, and it's not even close. She's also one of the most disturbing things Umbrella ever created, which is saying something when Umbrella's baseline for a normal Tuesday is already horrifying. Here's the setup. In 1967, Umbrella lured architect George Trevor and his family to the Spencer Mansion under the pretense of a visit. Once they arrived, Umbrella abducted his wife Jessica and 14-year-old daughter Lisa for progenitor virus testing. Jessica's body rejected the virus, so Umbrella killed her. Results deemed uninteresting, which is, not ideal, but Lisa's body did something nobody expected. Instead of dying, her cells incorporated the virus into a stable, symbiotic relationship. Her physiology didn't shut down, it adapted. And the moment researchers saw that, they made a decision that would define the next 30 years of her existence. They kept her. For nearly 3 decades, Lisa lived as a prisoner beneath the Spencer Mansion, functioning as Umbrella's most reliable test subject. They injected her with T-virus prototypes. They implanted the Nemesis alpha parasite into her body, the same organism later used to create the Nemesis T-type. Her immune system treated it like a light snack, absorbed the parasite, destroyed it, added its DNA to her own genome. That gave her tentacles. By 1988, researchers isolated a unique progenitor strain from her blood that became the foundation for William Birkin's G-virus. Every nightmare the G-virus ever produced traces back to what was living inside this girl's bloodstream. She wasn't just a test subject, she was a biological archive of everything Umbrella ever tried to build. The cumulative result is a body that has no business still being alive, swollen with tumor-like growths, tentacles erupting from her back, regenerative abilities so extreme that Umbrella literally could not kill her. They tried, multiple times. Her cells just kept rebuilding. And then there's the face. Lisa wears the skin of her dead mother's face over her own, torn from the corpse because she recognized it. Because somewhere inside decades of viral mutation, a part of her still knew what her mother looked like, still wanted her back. That's what makes Lisa genuinely hard to deal with. Her diary entries show a slow deterioration of language, but one thread runs through all of them. She asks where her mother is. 30 years of being injected with every nightmare compound Umbrella could synthesize, and the one thing that survived was a 14-year-old girl's grief. When STRS encounters her in 1998, fighting Lisa doesn't feel like fighting a monster. It feels like putting down a victim of systematic abuse who happens to be functionally immortal. The only thing that finally stops her is the complete structural collapse of the Arklay facility. It took an entire building falling on her to end what 30 years of experimentation couldn't. Lisa Trevor is proof that the worst thing Umbrella ever did wasn't creating monsters. It was refusing to let one die. But if you think Lisa's story is hard to stomach, wait until you see what happens when you shove multiple parasites into a single human body and strip away everything, including the tragedy. The Regenerador. There's a moment in Resident Evil 4 that every single player remembers. You're walking through the island laboratory and you hear it before you see it. This wet, rasping breathing, like someone trying to inhale through a collapsed lung. Then it rounds the corner, and you realize 2 things simultaneously. 1, this thing used to be a person. 2, you cannot kill it. The Regenerador is what happens when Los Illuminados decides 1 Plaga parasite per body isn't enough. Instead of implanting a single parasite into a host, researchers stuffed multiple Plagas into 1 human body, scattering them throughout the torso and limbs like biological landmines. The result is a creature with cellular regeneration, so aggressive it can regrow entire limbs in seconds. Shoot its arm off, it grows back. Blow a hole through its chest, the flesh knits together before you can reload. It's less a monster and more a biological error message that refuses to close. And it looks the part. Gray, rubbery skin draped over an elongated frame like a suit that doesn't quite fit. Tiny glowing eyes, a mouth that stretches far wider than any human jaw should allow, and this slow, deliberate wobble, like it's learning to walk using someone else's legs. Every step is accompanied by that breathing, that horrible rhythmic wheezing that sounds like a broken broken ventilator in an abandoned hospital. Here's where it gets really fun. You empty an entire magazine into one of these things, and it just stands there absorbing rounds like you're throwing rice at a wedding. Limbs pop off, chunks of flesh scatter across the floor, and for half a second you think you've done it. Then the stumps bubble, the tissue inflates, and the limb comes back. The Regenerador doesn't care about your shotgun. It has exactly one weakness, and the game makes you earn it. The only way to actually put one down is to destroy the Plaga parasites hidden inside its body. You can't see them with the naked eye. You need the biosensor scope, an infrared attachment that reveals glowing hotspots where the parasites are nestled deep within the creature. Without it, you're just rearranging meat. The game deliberately delays giving you this scope, which means your first encounter is pure, unfiltered panic. You're burning through ammo on something that won't die, backing into corners, listening to that breathing get closer. Then there's the Iron Maiden variant, which is basically a Regenerator that woke up and chose violence. Same regeneration, same breathing, but now with retractable spikes covering its entire body. It can extend its arms, grab you from across the room, reel you in, and impale you on every spike simultaneously, which is, not ideal. What makes the Regenerador truly disturbing isn't the regeneration or the spikes, it's the helplessness. Every other enemy in Resident Evil 4 can be dealt with using skill, timing, and enough bullets. The Regenerador breaks that contract. It tells you your weapons don't work, the rules no longer apply, and you're going to stand there listening to wet breathing while you figure out what to do. Nobody who played this section forgot it. But if you think fighting one thing that won't stay dead is bad, wait until you meet something that was specifically engineered to never stop chasing you. Nemesis. Most bioweapons in Resident Evil are accidents. Someone gets infected, loses control, and the body does whatever it wants. Nemesis is the opposite. He was built on purpose, and that's what makes him terrifying. Here's the setup. Umbrella's Tyrant line, the T-103 series, were physically impressive, but basically brain dead. The T-Virus gave them size, strength, and durability, but it fried their higher brain functions. You've got a 7-foot wall of muscle that can punch through a car door but can't figure out how to open one, so Umbrella Europe's 6th laboratory developed a parasite called the NE-alpha. The idea was elegant in the most horrifying way possible. Implant a parasite directly into a tyrant's brain and let the parasite do the thinking. The NEA would latch onto neural tissue, restore cognitive function, and give the creature something no other tyrant had: actual, tactical, mission-oriented intelligence. And it worked. The result is the Nemesis T-type, a T-103 body fused with a NE-alpha parasite, creating something that can use weapons, execute complex pursuit strategies across an entire city, and speak, sort of. Its vocabulary consists of exactly one word, STRS, which is, not ideal if you're a member of Raccoon City's elite police unit during the 1998 outbreak, but the body horror goes way beyond a big guy in a trench coat. The NEA parasite actively mutates the host, producing tentacles that erupt from Nemesis' arms and back without warning. They stab, they grab, they can even infect other organisms. Nemesis isn't just a weapon, he's a walking parasite distribution system who also happens to carry a rocket launcher. And here's where it gets complicated. Every time you deal enough damage to think you finally put him down, his T-Virus metabolism triggers accelerated healing and structural reorganization. Blow off the trench coat, tentacles multiply. Destroy enough tissue, new acid-secreting glands develop. He's not just regenerating, he's adapting, specifically to whatever just hurt him. By the final encounter in Resident Evil 3, the thing that was once vaguely humanoid has become a towering, amorphous mass of flesh and tentacles. The NEA parasite has essentially consumed the tyrant from the inside out. At that point, calling it Nemesis feels generous. It's more like a building-sized digestive system with anger issues. What makes Nemesis truly unsettling is the psychology of being hunted by something that learns. Mr. X follows you through a police station. Nemesis follows you through an entire city, shows up when you don't expect him, and evolves countermeasures in real time. He's not wandering, he's hunting. There's a difference, and your nervous system knows it. The original human host? Nobody knows who they were. Umbrella didn't see a person when they started this project. They saw raw material. The host's name, history, and personality were overwritten the moment the parasite took root. All that remains is a mission directive and a single word repeated until someone finally puts enough ordnance into it. But if Nemesis Nemesis represents brute force engineering taken to its logical extreme. Wait until you see what happens when a child prodigy with a god complex decides to engineer herself using ant DNA Alexia Ashford. Most people in Resident Evil get infected against their will. Alexia Ashford looked at a virus and said, "Yes, please, I'll take one of those." And then she took a nap for 15 years to make sure it worked properly, which is, not ideal. Here's the thing about Alexia. She wasn't some desperate scientist bleeding out on a lab floor. She was a 10-year-old clone with an IQ that made every adult in the room look like they were still learning to tie their shoes, and she decided the best use of her talents was to become a god. Not metaphorically, she literally engineered a virus designed to turn her into a queen organism that could control every living thing around her. The virus is T. Veronica, created by combining the progenitor virus with queen ant genes and plant DNA. 3 completely separate biological kingdoms stitched into one horrifying cocktail. The idea was modeled on ant colonies. One queen at the top, total obedience beneath her. That was always the plan, but raw T. Veronica was too volatile. Her own father got an early version, and it turned him into Nosferatu, a blind, mutated wreck chained to the Antarctic facility's basement. Alexia looked at what happened to her dad and thought, "I can do better." So she injected herself and went into cryogenic sleep for 15 years, betting everything on a slow symbiosis, letting her keep control where he lost it. And honestly, it worked. When she wakes up in 1998, Alexia can generate flammable blood, control swarms of infected ants, and manipulate tendrils of plant biomass like extensions of her own body. She still looks human, pale, composed, walking around the Antarctic base like she owns it. She looks at Chris Redfield and Albert Wesker the way you'd look at ants on your kitchen counter. But when she actually starts fighting, the elegance drops fast. Her first transformation sheds her human skin entirely. Underneath is chitinous flesh, elongated insect limbs, and organic appendages that look like a cross between plant vines and arthropod legs. The queen metaphor was never a metaphor. She's becoming a literal insect queen, complete with an oviduct structure connecting her to the surrounding environment like a hive node. Then it gets worse. Her insect arms develop into full wings, and she tears free, mutating into something resembling a giant dragonfly. Her blood functions like acidic plant sap. She's not a woman anymore. She's the central node of an entire T. Veronica ecosystem. Ants and parasitic vines and biomass all answering to her. The unsettling part isn't the body horror, though. It's that she wanted this. Every stage was planned and executed with the same cold precision she used to graduate university at age 10. She turned her father into a failed experiment without blinking. She forced Steve Burnside to mutate for what appears to be equal parts research and entertainment. Alexia didn't lose her humanity to the virus. She traded it, willingly, enthusiastically. The virus just gave her the body to match the ego. But if Alexia's transformation was a carefully orchestrated ascension into something inhuman, the next one on our list is the exact opposite. A warm, caring mother who never asked for any of it, twisted into something that crawls on ceilings and births swarms of insects from her own body, Marguerite Baker. Before Resident Evil 7, the series had never really done domestic horror. You had labs, mansions, police stations. But a family home in the bayou where a mother tries to feed you dinner? That's new. And Marguerite Baker is the reason it works, because she takes everything comforting about a maternal figure and turns it into something that makes your skin crawl. Here's the setup. In 2014, the Baker family finds a young girl named Eveline washed ashore after a hurricane wrecks a tanker near their Louisiana property. They bring her inside because that's what decent people do. They didn't know Eveline was a genetically engineered bioweapon built using a weaponized fungus called the mold. Her entire purpose was to infect and assimilate people into a family she could dominate, and the Bakers walked right into it. Marguerite's infection is gradual. The mold colonizes her body, rewrites her biology, and warps her mind, but it doesn't erase her personality. It corrupts it. Before infection, Marguerite was a caring mother. She cooked, kept the house together, welcomed strangers. After the mold takes hold, she still does all of those things. She still insists you sit down at the dinner table. She still prepares meals. The meals just happen to contain human organs and mold-tainted flesh now, which is, not ideal. The domestic horror angle is what separates her from every other transformation on this list. You're not fighting her in a lab or a castle. You're fighting her in a house with family photos on the walls. She screams at you the way an angry parent would, except her jaw unhinges and a centipede crawls out of her mouth mid-sentence. Just a completely normal thing to do at the dinner table, but her boss fight is where the body horror fully commits. She retreats to the old greenhouse, and by the time you find her again, she's barely human. Her limbs have elongated into spider-like appendages. Her Her lower abdomen has swollen into a massive insect-like egg sac, an ovipositor producing waves of mutant insects she controls as extensions of her own body. She doesn't just command them, she births them. Her entire reproductive system has been hijacked into a factory for mold-based swarms. Great, add that to the list. What makes Marguerite genuinely tragic is the origin of the whole nightmare. She got infected because she tried to help a child. That's it. Eveline looked like a scared little girl, and Marguerite's maternal instincts kicked in. The mold then took those exact instincts and amplified them into something violent and possessive. Her obsession with feeding people, keeping the family together, protecting the household, all of it is a twisted amplification of who she actually was. Eveline didn't invent a new personality. She just turned the volume up to a frequency that produces nightmares. The nurturing mother became the brood mother. The family dinner became a forced feeding. The warm home became a hive. And all because she opened her door to a stranger. But if you think a woman fusing with a swarm of insects is bad, wait until you see what a dominant species Plaga does to a trained soldier's arm. Jack Krauser. Most people in Resident Evil get infected against their will. Krauser walked up to the parasite and said, "Yes, please." Here's the thing. Before the Plaga, Jack Krauser was already dangerous. Special ops soldier. Partnered with Leon Kennedy on a mission in South America back in 2002. Genuine mutual respect between two elite soldiers. But that mission ended with Krauser's left arm severely injured, bad enough to force him into early retirement, and that's where everything goes sideways. Because Krauser didn't retire gracefully. He didn't pick up fishing or start a podcast. He stewed. A career soldier stripped of the only thing that gave his life meaning, watching his body fail him while the government moved on without a second thought. So when Albert Wesker came knocking with an offer and a parasite, Krauser didn't hesitate. He voluntarily infected himself with a dominant species Plaga, a strain fundamentally different from the ones turning villagers into ganados. Subordinate Plagas make you a puppet. Dominant Plagas make you the puppeteer. Krauser kept his mind, his tactical expertise, everything. He just also happened to be carrying a monster inside his left arm now, and that arm. That arm is where Krauser goes from interesting villain to genuine body horror showcase. During his confrontation with Leon, Krauser literally throws his gun on the ground, tells Leon to witness the power. His left arm, the same arm that ended his career, suddenly ruptures. The skin tears apart, and what emerges is a massive bladed claw covered in chitinous armor plating, stretching into a scythe-like appendage that can deflect bullets and cut through steel. The Plaga didn't just heal his old injury, it overcompensated. It took his greatest weakness and turned it into the deadliest weapon in the room. But here's where it gets complicated. Krauser controls this. He triggers the mutation at will, shifting between human form and bladed nightmare depending on the situation. The rest of his body stays enhanced with superhuman speed and reflexes. He's not a shambling monster, he's a precision instrument that happens to have a sword for an arm. And the whole time, he's talking, taunting Leon, bringing up their shared history like two old friends catching up, except one of them has a bone blade where his forearm used to be. He genuinely believes the Plaga didn't corrupt him, it completed him. The irony is that the thing he's most proud of is growing out of the exact spot where his humanity cracked in the first place. Krauser chose this. Nobody kidnapped him, nobody tricked him. He looked at a parasite that fuses with your nervous system and restructures your skeletal tissue and thought, yeah, that'll fix me. He got his strength back, got his purpose back. He just had to trade his loyalty, his honor, and whatever was left of the man Leon once respected. His death proves the obvious point. The Plaga made him stronger. It didn't make him invincible. All that deliberate self-destruction and pursuit of physical perfection, and he still ends up bleeding out in a ruin, which is, not ideal. But if you think a soldier voluntarily turning his arm into a blade is as far as Plaga mutations go, wait until you see what happens when an aristocrat decides to merge his entire body with the mother organism that births the parasites in the first place. Ramon Salazar. Ramon Salazar is, without question, the most annoying villain in Resident Evil 4. He's a tiny, shriveled little man who dresses like an 18th century aristocrat, talks like he's rehearsing for community theater, and walks around flanked by two towering insect bodyguards, because apparently that's a normal thing to do. He taunts you through the entire castle section with this smug, high-pitched voice, acting like he's some kind of unstoppable force of nature. But here's the thing. Salazar isn't just annoying. He's a traitor to his own bloodline. The first Castellan sealed Las Plagas beneath the castle centuries ago and made it his family family's sworn duty to keep them locked away forever. Every Salazar after him upheld that responsibility. Every single one. Until Ramon. This guy breaks the seal, helps Los Illuminados dig the parasites back up, infects his own village, and hands Sadler the biological arsenal he needs to threaten the entire world. All because some cult leader told him it was a good idea. And he didn't just tag along for the ride. He accepted a dominant species plaga, giving him control over lesser ganados, his Verdugo bodyguards, and basically every infected creature in the castle. He had full cognitive function the entire time. This wasn't mind control. He knew exactly what he was doing. When Leon finally corners him, Salazar doesn't run. He walks up to the Queen Plaga, this massive flower-like organism anchored to the castle wall, and lets it absorb him. The Queen Plaga is the reproductive heart of the entire parasite ecosystem. It produces plaga eggs. It's the mother organism, and Salazar feeds himself to it like an offering. What comes out is genuinely one of the most bizarre boss forms in the franchise. The fused creature is this enormous vertical mass of tendrils, chitinous armor, and petal-like growths rooted into the architecture itself. Salazar's body is visible near the center, encased in a protective pod, still talking, still mocking Leon from inside a biological cocoon. His remaining Verdugo merges into the structure too, becoming a massive appendage capable of instant kill attacks, and the scale contrast is what sells it. This is a guy who barely comes up to Leon's chest. He looks like a strong breeze would finish him, and now he's the central nervous system of a creature the size of a building. It's like watching a chihuahua pilot a tank, except the tank is alive and made of parasites. The worst part is, he's still conscious through all of it. The dominant plaga preserved his mind completely, so every shrieking insult during the fight is coming from a guy who willingly crawled inside a giant parasite flower because he thought it would make him powerful enough to win. It didn't. Leon kills the entire fused organism. Centuries of the Salazar family's guardianship, betrayed by one fanatical little man who wanted to be bigger than he was. The thing that consumed him didn't make him a god. It made him a component. A tiny screaming face inside a monster that was mostly not him. Which is, not ideal. But if Salazar's downfall was getting swallowed by his own weapon, wait until you see what happens when Albert Wesker injects himself with a virus he literally designed from scratch. Ouroboros Albert Wesker. Every villain in this franchise eventually loses control. Birkin injects himself in a panic. Lisa gets experimented on against her will. Salazar fuses with a giant flower because a cult leader told him it was a good idea. But Wesker spent decades planning this. He engineered the virus. He refined it. He built the entire delivery system, and then he stuck it in his own arm and turned into a tentacle monster in a volcano, which is, not ideal. Ouroboros kills almost everyone it touches. It's a progenitor-based strain designed to rip through the human population like a filter, destroying anyone who doesn't carry a very specific genetic trait. If you don't have the right DNA, Ouroboros tears you apart from the inside out, your body consumed by a writhing mass of black tentacles until there's nothing left that even resembles a person. Just a pile of oily, thrashing roots with a grudge. But Wesker wasn't normal. He'd been modified since childhood through the Wesker Project, an umbrella eugenics program that dosed selected kids with progenitor derivatives. He survived. He got superhuman speed, reflexes, strength. For years he operated as this impossibly composed supervillain, dodging bullets in a trench coat, backhanding boulders, monologuing about the next stage of human evolution, like a guy who's genuinely believed he was already there. And honestly, he kind of was. Before Ouroboros, Wesker was the most dangerous thing in the entire series. He orchestrated the mansion incident, he manipulated Tricell, he captured Jill Valentine and used her antibodies to refine Ouroboros into something more lethal. The plan was simple. Load the virus into missiles, launch them into the atmosphere, kill everyone who didn't meet his genetic standards, rule whatever was left. Hey Albert, what's step 2? Genocide. Cool. And step 3? Be king of the survivors. Great. No notes? But here's where it all falls apart. During the final confrontation with Chris and Sheva, Wesker injects himself with Ouroboros. Not out of desperation. He does it because he genuinely believes he's the one person on Earth perfectly suited to control it. His enhanced body partially accepts the virus. For a brief moment, it looks like he might be right. Then the tentacles start. Massive black appendages erupt from his back and arms. His skin darkens to a slick, metallic sheen as biomass spreads across his body like an oil spill with ambition. The sleek, controlled image he spent the entire series cultivating dissolves in real time. He's not ascending, he's being eaten alive by his own creation, and the setting is perfect. A volcano, molten lava, the most dramatic possible stage for the most dramatic possible meltdown. The guy who built the virus, tested it, refined it, and planned to reshape the entire species with it, still didn't fully understand what it would do to him. That's not just hubris, that's the definition of the word. Every other entry on this list involves someone losing their humanity to something they didn't fully choose or didn't fully understand. Wesker understood it better than anyone alive. He chose it with absolute certainty, and it still consumed him. The architect of Ouroboros ends his story as a writhing mass of black tentacles, sinking into lava, screaming at the two people who refuse to let him play God. Not all stories have a moral, but this one does. Don't build a virus that eats people and then inject it into yourself inside a volcano. That's just common sense. Resident Evil is technically a series about zombies, mutants, and the occasional invincible Spanish villager throwing a sickle at your head. But what the franchise is actually about, when you look at 30 years of plot, is the rug being pulled out from under you. Every other entry includes some moment where a friend turns out to be a spy, a mentor turns out to be a monster, or the woman knitting in the rocking chair turns out to be a bioweapon. The lore is essentially a stack of revelations balanced on top of more revelations, and Capcom has gotten very, very good at making sure none of it is what it looks like. Here are the 10 most franchise-shaking twists in Resident Evil history, ranked by how hard each one detonated the universe around it, starting with personal betrayals and ending with the reveal that quietly rewrote 30 years of canon. Ada Wong is a corporate spy. You spend most of Resident Evil 2 thinking Ada Wong is a journalist tracking down her missing boyfriend John, a researcher who supposedly disappeared during the Raccoon City outbreak. She is mysterious, she is competent, she handles a pistol better than any non-cop civilian has any right to, and there is a small, growing romantic thing between her and Leon S. Kennedy that the game keeps quietly leaning into. The whole framing is regular woman in over her head. Then a phone call goes off and the entire performance falls apart. Ada is not a journalist. There is no missing boyfriend. The grieving girlfriend routine was a cover story, and the woman Leon has been bleeding for is a corporate spy sent into Raccoon City to extract a sample of the G virus from William Birkin's body for a rival of Umbrella. Every soft moment between them was a tactical resource Ada was managing, while she got closer to the prize. The lore ripple here is significant, because Ada becomes the first major character in the franchise to operate outside the Umbrella vs. Survivors binary. Up until that phone call, everyone in Resident Evil is either an Umbrella employee, an Umbrella victim, or someone trying to stop Umbrella. Ada introduces a third category: rival corporations, professional industrial espionage, a whole shadow market where the viruses are products and survivors are collateral. She becomes the bridge to that world for the rest of the franchise. The psychological shock lands hardest in the moment. Ada takes the bullet meant for Leon and seemingly dies in his arms, because by that point, you have already learned she has been lying to him the entire game, and you cannot tell whether the sacrifice is real loyalty finally surfacing or one last extraction trick. Leon does not get to know either. He spends the next 20 years still in love with a woman whose actual name and employer he has never been told. Mia Winters is an operative for the Connections. Resident Evil 7 sells you a domestic horror story. Your wife Mia disappears 3 years ago. You get a video message telling you she is alive at a creepy plantation in Louisiana, and you drive out there as a regular guy trying to rescue a regular woman from whatever swamp cult has taken her. The first hour of the game is paced like a found footage movie about a husband walking into a haunted house with absolutely no business being there. You are an everyman. Mia is the victim. The Bakers are the monsters. Then you find Mia's recorded confession, and the whole framing inverts. Mia was never a babysitter, and the trip on the tanker was never a normal job. She was an operative for the Connections, a bioweapons trafficking organization, and her actual assignment was the secure transport of Eveline, the engineered bioweapon at the center of the entire game. The reason your wife disappeared for 3 years is that her ship crashed while she was hauling a living biological weapon as cargo, and the reason the Bakers are monsters is because Mia's containment failed and Eveline got out. The lore ripple introduces the Connections as a successor to Umbrella's bioweapons trafficking shadow, a privatized franchise post-Umbrella ecosystem where the science kept moving even after the corporation collapsed. It also recasts Ethan from innocent husband to man, married to a woman whose actual job is biological weapons logistics, a dynamic the rest of the saga never fully resolves. The shockwave for Ethan is layered with horror, because by the time he learns who Mia really is, he has already been infected, mutated, and partially possessed by the same bioweapon Mia was supposed to be guarding. The revelation does not give him answers. It just tells him that the woman he was trying to save was the reason he needed saving in the first place. Jill Valentine is the masked figure. Resident Evil 5 spends most of its runtime introducing a mysterious masked operative working alongside Albert Wesker. She moves with combat training nobody else in the field has. She fights you in coordinated set pieces with Wesker calling the shots, and she is rendered with just enough detail to make you sure you are supposed to recognize her under the mask. You spend the entire game waiting for the reveal, half suspecting the answer the whole time. Then Chris Redfield rips the mask off and it is Jill Valentine, his partner, his best friend, the woman everyone had assumed died at the end of the prior arc tied to Spencer's estate. Jill survived her fall. Wesker collected her body, he kept her preserved, then implanted her with a control device and reconditioned her into a personal bodyguard, weaponizing the closest person in Chris's life against him. The lore ripple here recontextualizes the entire space between Resident Evil 1 and 5. Jill has been alive this whole time, in Wesker's custody, being used as a research subject and a weapon. It also confirms how much further Wesker has drifted from anything human. He is not just running bioterrorism operations, he is mind-controlling Chris's best friend for sport. The control mechanism would later become a recurring piece of franchise tech, showing up in different forms across spin-off material and side games. The psychological shockwave is one of the few moments in the entire franchise where Chris audibly breaks. He spends the rest of the fight half fighting Jill, half pleading with her to come back, and the gameplay loop punishes you for hurting her. You are supposed to disable the control device on her chest, not kill her. It is the closest the series ever gets to making the player feel actively bad about pulling the trigger, and the resolution, when it finally comes, is more relief than victory. Spencer Mansion is just a front for an underground laboratory. For most of the first Resident Evil, the Spencer Mansion appears to be exactly what it advertises: a creepy gothic estate owned by a wealthy eccentric, somehow overrun by zombies and monsters because a virus got loose somewhere on the property. You spend hours solving puzzles built around suits of armor, antique paintings, a piano nobody is playing, and a dining room with a clock you absolutely have to interact with. The atmosphere is, old money goes wrong. Then you find the elevator, then another elevator, then a series of stairwells, then a hidden door behind a bookshelf, behind which is an industrial corridor that descends into a fully operational underground biological research laboratory. The mansion is not a haunted estate at all. It is a deliberately designed disguise, a Victorian skin draped over a massive corporate bioweapons facility, owned and operated by the Umbrella Corporation, where the zombies, hunters, and that one giant snake you fought in the attic were all engineered on site. The lore ripple from this single discovery is enormous in retrospect because it establishes the foundational pattern that defines the rest of the franchise. Every Resident Evil location that follows: the Raccoon City sewers, the Antarctic base, the African oil refinery, the Spanish village, the Louisiana plantation, the Romanian castle. Is the Spencer Mansion structure repeated? There is always a normal facade. There is always something monstrous engineered beneath it. The mansion is the prototype, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it anywhere else in the series. The shockwave at the time was less betrayal and more scale shift. You came in expecting a haunted house, and you exit with the dawning understanding that the haunted house was the lobby. Everything you thought was the entire game was actually the opening level, and the real horror was something a corporation built on purpose, on paper, with a budget line item. Albert Wesker is an Umbrella double agent. Captain Albert Wesker is supposed to be your boss. He is the leader of STAR's Alpha Team, your tactical commander, the man who sent you into the Arklay Mountains to investigate the disappearance of Bravo Team. He spends most of Resident Evil 1 conveniently absent during dangerous encounters and conveniently present whenever someone needs a calm voice telling the survivors what to do next. In hindsight, his uniform never gets dirty. The reveal lands in the laboratory beneath the mansion. Wesker is not a cop, he never was. He is a senior Umbrella researcher who engineered the entire mansion incident as a controlled live fire test, using STARS as expendable combat data, armed humans deployed against bioweapons in a sealed environment, with every encounter logged for product development. The people he sent to die were running quality assurance on Umbrella's products. He took the badge and the rank precisely so he could choose who walked into the meat grinder. The lore ripple from this twist is the entire shape of the franchise. Wesker becomes the through-line antagonist, who survives across multiple games, betrays Umbrella itself, joins shadow organizations, builds his own bioweapon empire, and eventually attempts global infection in Resident Evil 5. None of that exists if his RE1 reveal does not land. He is the first character to prove that the real threat in Resident Evil was never the monsters. It was the people who made them, dressed as the people who fight them. The psychological shockwave hits in the cutscene, where he is impaled by the tyrant he just unleashed on the survivors, dies dramatically, and is then revealed in later games to have injected himself with an experimental virus that resurrected him with superhuman speed, strength, and reflexes. The franchise basically used his fake death to upgrade him from villainous handler to near-immortal apex antagonist. Every Wesker scene from that point forward carries the weight of a man who got promoted by his own betrayal. Oswell E. Spencer is murdered by Wesker. For almost 10 real-world years and 3 full-game generations, Oswell E. Spencer exists as a name in files. He is the founder of Umbrella. He is the mansion's owner. He is the unseen architect behind every virus, every facility, every monster the series has thrown at you. The series treats him as a kind of remote god, old, sick, hidden in a private European estate, untouchable. Players have spent the entire franchise waiting to meet him. Resident Evil 5 finally puts him on screen for about 90 seconds before Wesker kills him. Wesker arrives at Spencer's manor demanding answers about Project W, the experimental program Spencer ran on a group of gifted children, of which Wesker himself was one. And Spencer, frail in his wheelchair, calmly explains that he had always intended to use his viruses to create a new species of godlike humans. Wesker, who is one of those engineered humans, decides that he is the god in question, and that Spencer is therefore obsolete. He impales him through the chest and walks out of the room. The lore ripple is structural. The death of Spencer ends the original Umbrella era completely. Every villain who came before Wesker now traces back to a man who can no longer answer for any of it. It also reframes Wesker's whole arc. He is not just a rogue researcher anymore, he is the surviving end product of Spencer's own ambitions, the experiment that outlived the experimenter. Project W becomes one of the most important pieces of franchise backstory, all unlocked by a single conversation. The shockwave of the moment is the quiet of it. Spencer barely resists. Wesker barely raises his voice. The man behind decades of horror dies in a 5-minute conversation in a dim study, on a rainy night, with no music swell and no boss fight. The most powerful figure in Resident Evil history exits like a deleted line of code. Eveline is the withered old woman. Resident Evil 7 keeps showing you a strange, blue-eyed little girl. Sometimes she appears in cutscenes. Sometimes she leaves drawings on the walls. Sometimes she just stands in the corner of a room and watches you. The Baker family talks about her as if she were a real child, and the framing of the game actively encourages you to read her as something like a ghost, a vengeful little girl spirit haunting the estate, possibly responsible for the Baker's madness. The reveal is that she is neither a ghost nor a little girl. Eveline is a bioweapon, designated E-Zeros-1, a fully grown engineered being whose growth has been catastrophically accelerated. The little girl you keep seeing is a hallucination she projects into infected hosts as part of her psychological control mechanism, a stable form she chose for herself before her body started failing. Her actual physical form, the withered old woman you find strapped to a chair in the deepest part of the house, is what she really looks like at the end of her artificially compressed lifespan. The child was the costume. The dying old woman was the truth. The lore ripple reframes the entire family. The Bakers are not evil. They are infected, hallucinating Eveline as their adopted daughter, treating her as a child because the bioweapon has hijacked their perception. Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, all of them are victims of a single weaponized little girl-shaped delusion. The reveal also introduces the mold in the bioweapon E series, which becomes the entire engine of the next 2 mainline games games and reshapes what a Resident Evil monster even is? The shockwave is the moment the camera pulls in on the figure in the chair and your brain reassembles every previous Eveline scene around the new information, every drawing on the wall, every shadow in the corner, every time she said, "Play with me." All of it was an old, dying, engineered organism using a child's mask to seduce a family into loving her before her body finally gave out. Ethan Winters has been dead since Resident Evil 7. For all of Resident Evil 7 and most of Resident Evil Village, Ethan Winters is your regular guy protagonist. He gets hurt, he bleeds, he staples his own hand back on, he pours mysterious healing fluids on missing fingers and watches them reattach. The franchise frames all of this as Ethan is tough, or the healing items are very good, or this is just video game logic. Do not think about it too much. Resident Evil Village's final act asks you to think about it. Chris Redfield's intelligence files, combined with a quiet revelation from the Duke, confirm that Ethan was killed by Jack Baker at the start of Resident Evil 7. When he had his hand severed and his throat opened during the dinner table scene, the mold revived him, took over his cellular structure, and rebuilt him as a mold-based duplicate that retained his memories and personality. Every healing animation across 2 full games was mold reconstructing tissue. Every survival moment was a corpse refusing to stop. The lore ripple retroactively rewrites both Resident Evil 7 and Village. Ethan is not a survivor protagonist in the traditional sense. He is the first playable character in the franchise who is fundamentally a bioweapon himself, made of the same substance as the monsters he is fighting. It also reframes the BSAA's interest in him. In 7, he was a useful probe, a mold-compatible host walking unwittingly toward the source organism, and nobody told him because nobody needed him to know. The psychological shockwave belongs to Ethan, who has roughly 5 minutes between learning the truth about his own body and using that truth to defeat Mother Miranda. He gets to be a hero and a corpse at the same time. He says goodbye to his daughter. He dies on screen, finally, properly, after 2 games of postponed death. It is one of the only times the franchise has let an ending feel earned, because the protagonist had to die to make it. The Umbrella Corporation went bankrupt off-screen. The Umbrella Corporation is the spine of Resident Evil. It is the antagonist of the first 3 mainline games, the maker of every important virus, the employer of every important villain, and the engine of the entire franchise's plot. After Raccoon City gets nuked at the end of Resident Evil 3, you understandably expect the next big game to be about taking Umbrella down for good, exposing the conspiracy, dragging the executives in front of a tribunal, the whole catharsis. Resident Evil 4 opens with a text crawl that casually mentions Umbrella has already collapsed, off-screen, between games. The corporation that defined the entire series went bankrupt in the legal and economic fallout of the Raccoon City disaster, was dissolved by international tribunals, and is essentially gone before the new game even begins. Leon, now a federal agent, is sent to rescue the president's daughter from a Spanish cult, and the entire Umbrella plot you spent 3 games building toward is handled in a sentence at the top of the credits. The lore ripple from this decision was the franchise's biggest pivot. Bioweapons stopped being one company's product and became a globalized black market. Tricell, the Connections, Neo Umbrella, the BSAA, and an entire ecosystem of post-Umbrella organizations rushed into the vacuum. The series broadened from fight one evil corporation to fight whatever organization caught the loose viruses this week. Without Umbrella's off-screen death, none of the modern Resident Evil shape exists. No Plagas, no mold, no Las Plagas-derived villages, no connections. The shockwave at the time was real fan whiplash. The series had spent years promising a confrontation, and Capcom decided the confrontation was less interesting than the aftermath. The reaction split players for years, but in retrospect, the move freed the franchise from a single recurring villain and forced it to grow up into a sprawling, decentralized, scarier world where the bad guys do not all share a logo. Mother Miranda orchestrated the entire history of Umbrella. Resident Evil Village introduces Mother Miranda as the regional antagonist, a powerful, mold-empowered high-powered woman ruling a small Romanian village, manipulating the four lords, kidnapping Ethan's daughter for a ritual to resurrect her own long-dead child. She is framed as one more local horror in a franchise full of them. Big villain, contained setting, personal stakes. Then her files reveal that she was Oswell E. Spencer's mentor. A century ago, young Oswell sat at Miranda's feet and listened to her preach about her godlike megamycete fungus, about the resurrection of the dead, about using biology to escape mortality. He took her ideas, sanitized them, industrialized them, and built the Umbrella Corporation on top of them. Every virus Umbrella ever produced, Progenitor, TG, all of it, traces back to research originally derived from Miranda's mold and her quiet century of experimentation in the Carpathian Mountains. The lore ripple is total. Umbrella did not invent Resident Evil's biology, Miranda did, and Spencer copied her homework. Every monster you have ever fought, every survivor you have ever played, every cutscene Wesker ever monologued in, all of it is downstream of a grieving mother in a Romanian village trying to bring her dead daughter back. The franchise's entire backstory was always her story. Everyone else was a footnote in it. Spencer, Wesker, Birkin, the entire bioweapons industrial complex, they are her students, twice removed. The shockwave of this twist is structural rather than emotional. It does not break any one character's world the way Ada's reveal broke Leon's, or the way Eveline's reveal broke the Bakers. It breaks the franchise's world. The villain of one game turns out to be the silent architect of every other game's existence, and you only learn this in optional documents you have to actively read. Capcom buried the biggest twist in the entire series in a side file, which is somehow the most Resident Evil decision they could have possibly made. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.